You ready? Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. For you that I haven't met, I'm Steve Nelson. I chair the Water Marketing Committee, and appreciate everybody that's in attendance and whoever's come in on Zoom. I appreciate we have this opportunity to go over quite a bit of stuff that we've done on the Water Marketing Committee. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron.
Welcome everybody. Been a while. Oh, did I just hit something? I heard a beep. Can you guys hear us in there?
We can.
It beep.
Yep, we can hear you.
If you, we can, but okay.
Whew. Whoa, what'd you say? There goes the humming in the ear.
Can everybody hear me? So, welcome everybody. It's been a while, and we apologize. We have been busy. As many of you know, we're dealing with the Sigma response letters and a lot of other things. But we've talked to some of the committee members. We're up. We've got the structure up. We need to start running right now. So we did have a January meeting planned. We had a family emergency part of the team. We couldn't hold that meeting. We figured let's let everybody digest the guidelines. But I think the goal today is let's get those guidelines behind us and get it finalized, try and get it to the point where we can then now move and start making decisions on the elements that will be in the water marketing strategy. So again, I welcome everybody here. I think we've got all of our members here, except we have been notified by Brian Watson that he's having to step down from the water marketing strategy. So we'll be trying to fill that position back. I think that we'll try and find somebody in the East. I think they may be asking to add Chris Hunter to the list. So we'll see how that plays out, but I'll follow up with them. I just got notice this morning about that. So with that, maybe we quickly go around the room for the audiences on the Zoom's benefit to introduce the committee members. Matthew, you want to start?
Yeah, Matt Watkins. I think I'm representing East Kaweah and Farm Exhibit.
Scott Rogers. I'm representing Player Farm. David Jordan, integrator. Joe Carter,
Can't hear that.
Let me put the mic closer to you guys. So that's your guys' mic here. Let me just, why put it way out here? We'll just put it right there. Okay. Yeah, you guys will have to speak up a little bit to get to the mic. So, Sophie.
Sophie Mulholland. I'm the advisory council for the 3 Kaweah GSAs and also the Eastern Thule GSA. I represent Sequoia Riverlands Trust, which is a conservation organization, and I've been in farming and ranching for 60 years.
I'm Jeremy Barrell, assistant engineer at TID.
Steve Nelson, chairman of the Water Marketing Committee, also on the GSA board, and mayor of the city of Visalia.
Greg Moy with Stantec supporting this effort.
And I'm Matthew Feenup, working with the Stantec team as part of the consultant.
And online, I think we got Chuck. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Chuck Nichols. I think my representation is for industry, but we have a processing business and we farm in the East, Greater and Mid-Kaweah basins.
Great, and I apologize. We're not going to do the public introductions. I think there's quite a few folks on there. So what we wanted to do now is turn it over to Matthew to do a recap of the meeting.
One more person.
Oh, hey, Manuel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My apologies, I was off. That's still.
Want to introduce yourself really quick?
Hi, everyone. My name is Manuel Leon. I'm here representing Self-Help Enterprises. I lead the leadership development program. I'm here representing the communities today. Thank you for having me, everyone.
Let me, you want me to project?
I think so. Which one is it?
This one. There we go.
All right, it's back up. Yep. All right. So just to recap what our goal, where we were and what our goals are. So you'll recall in the December committee meeting, we did an exercise trying to identify sort of what are the principles that are going to guide decision makings as we review and then select among a menu of strategies employed in other water markets. And we took those comments from the Jamboard exercise and produced the following table. So you actually have this reproduced in your notes. This is just the first page of that. And our goal was to reduce those, all of those comments that were submitted in the Jamboard exercise to a few principles. And those are reproduced here. And so these are very high level descriptions of the guiding principles that were identified. What's interesting is that you'll see the way we've written these are fairly agnostic. And so as you look at this list and you compare it to the table of principles, you'll notice that there were situations where some people said, we want, we want transfers between GSAs, right? And we want transfers between basins, right? We identify something like flexibility, but then leave it to the group to identify what's the optimum level of flexibility to provide growers. And so in that last meeting, the January meeting, our goal was to actually start digging into these, as Soapy said very clearly, the devil's in the details, right? And that there's trade-offs. First of all, there may be trade-offs between some of these principles. For example, greater flexibility in terms of transferring pumping allocation may have implications for adverse impacts to other groups, right? And so there may be trade-offs between principles. Then even within an individual principle, different stakeholder groups may see those very, very differently, right? And so really the goal is to actually start having that difficult conversation right up front, right? So not to put this off and pretend that those potential conflicts don't exist. It's to really start grappling with those right away. And the reason for that, and so anyway, we'll get into what all that means and how we're going to ask you to go about that. But what we heard in the January meeting was that the committee needs time to process all of those comments that fellow committee members made. And so we sent out that document online. We received comments from a couple of very, very detailed comments from a couple committee members. And so we want to start digging into that today. So that's where we're at and why we are back here at this point in time. And so we'll jump into that in much more detail in a bit.
What we wanted to do first is provide you with an update of that. We have two teams, right? A legal team and an engineering team. And we also have been engaging with them. And so as we start looking into these guiding principles and other elements, it was always scoped that the legal team is there to support us. Originally, you received a report from Valerie Kincaid on what the water rights are. The three GSAs have agreed to, they want their legal counsels a part of this process and engage equally in the development of the water marketing strategy. They don't want one legal counsel leading the way. They need all three. If this is going to work, they all three need to buy into it. So we met with the legal team to give them their kind of the flavor of the water marketing strategy, what we're doing and what was originally scoped. And what they're charged with was analyzing the existing water rights within a water marketing strategy. That's scope item. This was all in the grant, part of 2.1. And then researching existing water markets and strategies. So that's us. Oh, actually, that's, yeah. oh, I'm sorry, the two were the develop the framework and provide the guidance regarding the units of trade, all the elements.
Yeah, so what they're working on is this framework for understanding the relationship between water rights and transfers of pumping. And obviously that's an important input to this. There's an interface between that and the research of existing markets, right? Because we're actually surveying markets beyond California. And so there may be some things that are done other places that aren't consistent with California water rights. And so they'll sort of be applying a filter to the menu of different strategies that are being applied elsewhere.
So we met with them, tried to discuss with them what the charge is. They've met individually on their own, so we're not kind of interfering in their discussions. They've met once and they actually have started to work on the framework of the understanding of the relationship. They've reported back that the second item, the guidance actually is the easy part, they said. So once you get to that guidance part, they're gonna be able to engage much easier. So right now, they're spending their time in the first element. They've done a records kind of research on where the existing water markets or water rights are at, and they're analyzing that. So we'll be back to you guys with that work as they get completed. And we're kind of at their pace. We have to wait till they can find the time to get together. All three of them need to be there for that discussion each time. Yeah. So
yeah, and again, so just to reiterate what their task is, the first one, which is providing guidance about how water rights interact with the activities of this committee, is the big question that's out there, and it's the murkiest. Their second set of tasks is to then, develop all the administrative acts required for a GSA to implement a water market designed by this committee. They actually see that as the easy part, and so it actually means that their hard work for them is on the front end, so that they can provide that guidance.
They kind of didn't even know how to start. So their first meeting I heard was, wow, okay, we don't even know what to get started on. They actually kind of organically can jump the second one much easier. So on the engineering team side, they were working on the water budget updates. Those are, again, we left the water budget in 2017 and didn't touch it. So the PMP team and the Montgomery Associate team was updating the water budgets of the Subbasin from 2017 on. We have had to pull them off of that work in order to free them up to respond to the DWR comments. So at this point in time, their focus is now on the technical work we're doing to respond to DWR's comments. We're not ready for that workload anyway, and we've told them the minute they get done with the DWR comments, they need to get that water budget up and running and get it finalized. So I would suspect that for the next at least 3 months, we won't be hearing from them because they're off doing the technical work for the comments. So that's the only report coming out of the engineering team.
So any questions about either of those groups and the work they're undertaking, or comments?
I guess the engineering, I have a question on the engineering, because there's a discussion as far as how far water can move. So who are we waiting for to let us make the decision on how far water can move?
That is part of that technical analysis. So you need the water budget. What are you going to move? How much are you going to move? What's the allocation? And then ultimately, my initial thought is that you're going to have to use the model to start testing. Okay, I'm going to set a three mile parameter. Let's pump it and see what happens. Ooh, shoot, you got a cone of depression there that causes a problem. You go 5 miles. Okay, no, you're okay. 10 miles. Oh, see, it's disconnected. You got issues. So that model is moving separately. There is progress on that. Stanford University has updated the model. They're beginning the calibration mode. So they've told us, I think the updated timeline, Jeremy, they're targeting what's I haven't been on the last couple calls. What's the delivery date of the Stanford updated model? I'll get that to you guys, but I would suspect we can get that here sooner than we can actually get the water budget stuff. So
I only ask because the market, if we don't know how far we can move it, it's hard to get a market behind anything to go that direction.
correct. That's the question that's coming up right now, right? We have limits in our ordinances. Well, how'd you come up with that?
And on another thing is that the amount of water, underlying water and so on, I would think would be somewhat of a determinant in terms of how far you can move the water. Because if you're in an area where there's a substantial, in other words, you've got, how would you say, a relatively good supply. In other words, there's a pretty good basis of depth of water, as opposed to some place where they're up almost against the rock. You know, a little bit of over pumping or moving it very far is going to have a much greater effect than it will in an area that's got substantially more water.
And one other thing, and this will come up when we review existing water market strategies, there's also a couple ways to think about that. One is to limit the distance over which it can be transferred. The other way is to limit the direction.
It's the direction, that's what I was going to mention.
Beneficial to move it a very far distance if it's out of an area where pumping levels are depressed.
Right. Then that's the other one I was going to bring up, was the distance too. So, I mean, the direction, yes.
And I think the other part of the direction is where's the water really flowing to? Because when you get into paper water, and this water here has nothing at all to do with the transfer, that's not going to work.
Yeah, and so I guess that's the other thing, is a choice for this committee is going to, and among the individual GSAs, is going to be what's the way forward? Is it to take a model-driven approach where you do a series of simulation, you know, sort of desktop simulations, moving water, and see what the model predicts, or do you do a series of test, you know, pilots, discrete test markets that have a definitive starting point and ending point? You actually allow market transfers, and then you evaluate what happened and change the rules to reflect that.
That's what Fox Canyon has done. So to me, they're the best model we have.
Yeah, and we sort of actually did a hybrid where for us it's perhaps easier. There is a very clearly delineated pumping trough and there is a pretty clearly delineated area of seawater intrusion, and so we just put we put a boundary down on top of those geographic, natural, or hydrologic boundaries. And then that's the basis for management areas within which trade happens. And then we also have an adaptive approach. So there is a hybrid. You know, it was modeling of groundwater that produced the definition of those boundaries.
And I would envision there's actually, like you said, the middle ground could be, we could probably get the model in its current status if you recognize that it's not updated and run it. I mean, it's a good enough model to run tests, but it's not a good enough model to, you know, make affirmative, definite allocations and such like that. But you want to see how it reacts. For instance, we know we've got a mound into a city of Tulsa's wastewater treatment plant, right? So if growers want to transfer into that mound, you're probably going to be okay, and you can run those simulations and see what happened. Right? And you know, even the city has had discussions about that. Is do growers in that mound want to actually turn to groundwater? The problem is that area, generally around that area, is using that secondary treatment water. So we'll run those scenarios, and there's about there's going to be many different scenarios. But again, the importance of the guidelines is even more important now, because now we're talking about these. Now we're into actual actions. So we'll be able to bring these folks back in. We just don't see the need to have them right now, and actually are more concerned that we keep them on the focus, because if we have a inadequate GSP, we're in front of the state board, probably not with a market. That's even actually a good question we need to ask the legal team, is if we end up in probationary, will they allow a market? That's a good question. So that's my update on engineering. So I think now, Matthews, we're going to go and get into the heart. Did I wrong window again?
All right. So just an update on the review of existing water markets.
I'll have to verify that, Johnny. I believe it does. Okay.
All right. Now you have to click again in there. There's two developments in the area of the review of existing water markets. So first of all, there has been a lot of interest, and I don't know if I'd say a lot or vocal interest in the idea of a reverse auction for land fallowing. right? So rather than, there's two very different types of markets that you see throughout the United States. Some what in other settings would be called a spot market, where if someone saves a little bit of water, they can sell that little bit of unused water. If someone needs a little bit of water to finish a rotation, they can buy a little bit of water. Another one is sort of a all or nothing auction, right? Where someone can volunteer to fallow their ground and forego water use with the exception of irrigating a cover crop, and then be remunerated for that, for foregoing production for some period of time, anywhere from a single rotation to a whole year. And so this is because of the interest in this basin and others. I wanted to look into where has this been done and what are the lessons learned. So this was not something that was part of our initial review of water markets, but make no mistake, an auction of any kind it's simply a type of market, right? And so I was able to find some existing ones. And so these are being built into the, and we're still trying to collect information on some of them, but just to give you a sense, one of them that was really interesting. So this is really more to just get you start thinking about what else do you want to know about this. Buena Vista Storage District in Kern County did something really interesting. So first they actually had stored water, 12,200 acre feet available. And they used an auction, a sealed bid auction, so a one-time sealed bid auction to sell that stored water in 2014 to generate revenue for a local fallowing program. And so they, interestingly, they had a starting bid of $600 per acre feet, which was much more than the going price for state water project water at the time. They received 50 bids with a very large range of prices for those bids, 600 to 1,350. And 4 organizations bought all 12,000 acre feet for a pretty large sum. $1,100 seems high to me at this day and age, but remember, this is 2014, right? I understand there was water in other parts, Kern, water bank, others going for substantially more than 1,100. That produced nearly $14 million in revenue, which was then used for a fallowing program. And so Buena Vista Water Storage, instead of having a reverse auction where people submitted offers and they selected the cheapest offers first, they just decided to do a fixed $400 per acre incentive. And amazingly, at the time, they only wanted to sell 5,000 to 6,000 acres of, and they were so oversubscribed, 11,000 acres applied for the incentive. And so they ended up deciding to go with the first 7,500 acres. And so those were fallowed at a cost to those growers of $3 million. And so this is this is the example in California that has the most information about prices, bids, offers, how the thing was structured. And so I think it's interesting in that case. And we'll be talking to folks to try and find out what lessons they learned through that process. What I think is really interesting here is that there's a tremendous price spread there, right? It's amazing to see 2 markets where the difference in prices is this large, right? And you see, obviously, here, Buena Vista Water Storage arbitrage the price difference in those 2 markets to make $11.9 million. And so obviously what I'm curious to ask them about is, well, why didn't they first see if farmers locally wanted to pay perhaps more than $400 an acre for local fallow, right? And so that they could have traded water between landowners locally and then actually just, instead of capturing the spread, actually distributing that among growers. So anyway, so this is one we hope to learn more about, and we'll report to you because of the interest that auctions have had.
I have a question before you.
Please.
The 4 winners that purchased water, were they all major farming companies?
So I hope to find that out. 2 things. Yeah, so what type of organizations were there and where were they located? What's interesting is the information on this one doesn't say, were they in the same basin or were they in a different basin? And obviously that, if they're in a different basin, that might explain the difference in prices, obviously, right? That
Went over the hill.
Yeah, it could be. So I hope to find that out and let you know. Obviously, then there's a question about that's water that could have been brought into the local basin if in fact it was sold outside. So we'll find out. We'll get more details and report back to you. There's two other we're digging into. Westlands did a traditional reverse auction where they invited growers to submit offers. How much would it cost for you to fallow an acre of ground? Interestingly, most of the documentation on this is actually the requests for offers. There's very little information about what actually happened. We reached out, we did a preliminary communication with Westlands, and they basically said, yeah, we were really surprised. There was very little response. Very few people were willing to sell more than their reservation price was higher than what we were willing to pay. And so they only actually found 500 acres that they could enroll. And there hasn't been a second round since that.
Price.
What's that?
At what price?
Yeah, and again, this is the interesting one because it's Westlands. There is no price information available. You don't know what anyone offered, and we don't even know what they were willing to pay. So anyway, we're hoping to just chat with them and see if they'll disclose that.
Because I mean, the thing is, if they weren't, if the word was out there, well, we'll give you $100 an acre, $200 an acre.
Yep.
Everybody say, why bother?
Yep. You bet. Right. Yeah. And so since this one though was an actual reverse auction where they're inviting, what's nice as opposed to the previous one that was just a fixed price, if you're offering a certain price, clearly they could have gotten fallowing in the previous example much less than $400 an acre foot. It was oversubscribed. They in a sense overpaid. Here they should have invited the cheapest offers, but still had very little take up. And so we'll be exploring what the dynamics were, why there wasn't more robust participation.
Yeah, with Kern, they should have done the reverse auction there. And probably been able to retire a lot more ground for the same dollars.
Yep, that's right. Yep. And then Shafter-Wasco. Yeah, please.
This, the water that was sold before was all surface water, not well water.
Correct. Yes, that's true. Yep.
That's a significantly different dynamic because there's not well water available in a lot of parts of the west side of Kern County.
Yep, sure. That makes perfect sense.
In answer to the question on what type of entities were buying it during 2014 and 15, a lot of the west side nut crop growers were outbidding Met, and I guess not to their appreciation but the nut prices were for pistachios and almonds were both over $3 and now they're both under $2. So that situation doesn't exist.
Cool.
So market conditions have changed.
Yep. And change all the time, right? So the other thing, so you will receive, so first I want to point your attention to this. So what we've done is we have put together sort of a matrix of all the different strategies. What you see represented here is 19 California adjudicated basins, about 11 other markets in the Western United States, and 2 that are international. We throw Murray-Darling in as if it's a single market. It's actually dozens of different markets. But because they were authorized by federal legislation, they sort of act as one. And so this is, first of all, just the purpose of presenting it this way to you is to show you the rich menu of strategies that are employed in other places. And so what this is, first of all, it's broken into really just 3 different categories of strategies. Allocation is a giant piece of the design of water markets. How do you issue initial allocations of pumping? And as we reviewed last year in a committee meeting, there's, for California adjudicated basins, it's overwhelmingly based on historical use. There are other allocation methodologies as well. Allocation flexibility is a big one. So interestingly, if one of the goals is to create flexibility for particular stakeholder groups, some flexibility can be achieved without a market of any kind, right? Through the flexibility in the allocation. Typical examples of flexibility are carryover, where if you have unused water, you can roll it over to the next year. There are a couple basins that actually experiment with borrowing from the future. Oh, I'll pump more and I promise to pump less in the future. Now, each of those strategies has consequences for the possible functioning of a market that we can get into when at the appropriate time. Once you allocate water, how are you monitoring actual allocations and water use, right? And then what's the penalty for exceeding your allocation? So that's all of the allocation bin. Those are all prerequisites. These different, choosing among these strategies are prerequisites for a market. These are decisions that have to be made by GSAs, whether you engage in a market or not. But each of the decisions has implications for a market, and even if a market is possible. We then have a section here about different market structures. What do markets look like? Are they informal or formal? What is traded? Who can trade with whom? What's the term of transfer? Are these permanent or temporary? And how is price information made available, if it is at all? And then you see at the bottom different strategies for mitigating adverse impacts. So this could be adverse impacts to other market participants, adverse impacts to third parties that are not party to the actual market activity. It can also be impacts to communities, resources, natural resources, the basin. And so this is sort of the menu of choices of different strategies employed other places. What you will get from us in the next 2 weeks is you're going to get a report that summarizes these 3 different categories of strategies, where they're employed, and then sort of some trade-offs, right? What are the advantages and disadvantages, broadly speaking, of different strategies? And so you can expect to receive that from us in the next 2 weeks. What we would earnestly like is for the committee to review that and jot down comments, questions. What are things you want to learn more about? Are there particular strategies that you are enthusiastic about, dubious of, or just want to learn more about, and start to mark up that document? Because our next meeting of the committee will be to actually start digging into those existing strategies and to start framing for the committee choices, right, between A, B, and C, right, whatever those are. And so that's the goal here. And we will have additional information about the auctions built into that. So any questions or comments about this? And how we're going to use this?
No, I'll hold my question for
You
later.
don't have to.
Oh, no, I don't want to jump ahead.
Okay.
I was gonna, the only thing I'm saying is that, okay, so we're going through all these steps and so on. And we're gonna be starting in October, I assume, right, with our allocations, et cetera. How long do you envision that it's going to take before we actually have a means by which people can actually execute on some of this marketing, on some of these marketing proposals, whether it be reverse auction or trading amongst ourselves and so on? How long do you think that'll take? It'll be another year?
So I think what I've been messaging in the mid-kaweah GSA is, we're implementing in this May, and we provide, like Matthew had indicated, flexibility so that growers can move their allocations within their operations. The second question is
operation.
Yeah, how does Joe sell to Matthew? Right?
Yeah. Right. And the platform by which that's going to occur and to be tracked and all that.
So given that none of that has been developed, the goal would be to, what we had said here at the water marketing strategy, is to have the first phase or move into pilot. So I want to caution everybody, the goal is not to move into implementation, meaning broad scale, unless the GSA, this is really the GSA's decision. So if the greater kaweah decides, no, we're going to do it, we have enough meat on the bones on that document, we're going to do it, then your board will decide to do that by the end of the year. So that it's not phased perfectly with the October, but it is phased such that once you start getting into the part of the pumping season, you could theoretically start moving it around in 2023.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that we don't, spend so much time on the front end here that we where we
lose sight, you lose track. Well, and we are not, we're fully cognizant of that, because the growers that talked to me said, you don't have much time. we'll allow you that flexibility. What I've heard is for the first year or so, we get it. We're going to just move it within our ranches. But as soon as we start looking at actual shortages, right? So we bought enough flexibility, mid-kaweah did in 2022 to get by 2022. But once we start running into shortages, we need the tools to then talk to each other. And so yeah, not losing sight of that. However, the flip side of that is with all good things, if you rush it at the beginning.
Understood.
Yeah. So
But you got to keep a platform open and modify, and where it's able to be modified.
How important is it that the 3 GSAs and the kaweah come out with the marketing strategy? I hear that across the board, like, okay, every GSA can have their own, and if they ever want to adopt what we come up with, great. If not, then I hear other people say, no, the 3 GSAs need to be in agreement on what we're doing with marketing. What is your feeling on that?
I would say that when you look at how the 3 GSAs are working right now, we all have our little differences in our issues, but at the end of the day, we're coming back to the table to figure this out together. I know that at least from the management position, when Eric, Matt, Mike, and I talk, is the water marketing strategy has to be, it has to work for Joe to transfer to Matthew, and you guys are not even in the right. It has to work within the Subbasin, not within the GSA. So I don't, you as the committee are going to set those rules that determines that applicability, in my mind.
If I may interject one more thing and then I'll shut up.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, at some point too, there are a number of things that I think we need to either say yay or nay, so we don't have to have the attorney spending time on it and everything else. For example, moving water out of the basin. In other words, are we going to allow water to leave our basin to go to other basins? Okay. And you know, I think I would hope that most people here would say no, but that if that is the case, then we need to definitively draw that line in the sand, and the attorneys don't spend any time in, you know what I'm talking about, nor do we spend any more time entertaining that, and we can move on to something else.
Yeah,
There's probably a number of things in here we could say, is this a make or break? And if so, you know, yes, no, and move on.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons, one of the ways we hope to use this
you're going there.
document here is to cross things out, right? So I do want to say go back. I'm glad you made the comment when you did. It's not too early to have this conversation. Is that in terms of the work the committee is doing, there is a trade-off between getting flexibility to water users in a timely manner in response to current conditions, and doing this in a thoughtful way that maintains the buy-in of stakeholders across the basin. And there's no doubt that there's a trade-off between those two. I think that year-end deadline is entirely reasonable. You know, things were a little different in Fox Canyon in that we already had metering of wells. We already had very good water accounting relative to other basins. But, you know, this was about a 7-month-long process, open-ended process. And at the end of 7 months, we were ready to go. And so to me, end of year seems reasonable.
And Joe, the funny part was you asked you were going to get ready. I put a sentence in the email that went out last night reminding everybody. I said, bring your thumbs, because you're going to have to go thumbs up or thumbs down. So we're there.
Okay.
The first thing we need to know from you guys is on these guiding principles, because it helps us frame all our work, helps you frame your decisions. Is the however many there are right here, the guidelines, there's 6. So we're going to need thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yep.
Let's go.
Yeah. So just so you know we are, if there are strong ideas about another way of approaching this, we're very open to that. But the plan A right now is to, again, establish principles that where if there's consensus around a particular principle, it will do exactly what you're talking about. It will exclude some alternatives, and it will, in a sense, endorse others. You know, so here's an example I've shown once previously in this committee how we use these things. You know, we fought on the 7 months. We fought pretty contentiously for about the first 4 months, 3 or 4 months, on what those principles were. And then once we did incentivize conservation and creation of new supplies, as soon as everyone agreed, all stakeholders agreed on that principle, it was obvious what the choice was. The actual decision making was totally not contentious, right? Fighting about what was important, what we wanted to accomplish, and what we wanted to avoid was the hard work, and then the rest just flowed very, very smoothly from that. And we have a very unique market structure, and none of the decisions are arbitrary. It all came out of that initial process of saying, what do we need to accomplish? What do we need to avoid? And so with that, we have these 6 principles. Some of these are, and so I'll just go through these briefly, and then we'll jump in. We'll go into these in much more detail. That's right, it's fine. And so obviously the primary goal here is to provide water users flexibility. That's the whole purpose of a water market, right? So that one it's the one that almost goes without saying, right? If you don't need that additional flexibility, you probably don't need a marketing strategy. Adaptability, transparency, so a process that's visible and understandable to all stakeholders. That we're mitigating adverse impacts, in particular to disadvantaged communities, groundwater dependent ecosystems, and small farms. And that this is all conducted and implemented through an open process that involves input from the broadest range of stakeholders. Now, what we want to do with each of these, those are, again, the devil's in the details. So what we want to have is the more difficult conversation. Okay, so where do the priorities of a particular stakeholder group conflict with those of another? And what we want to know from different stakeholder groups is what's really essential and what can you live with, right? Where are those two things, where there's conflicts between stakeholder groups. And so I want to point out Craig and Sophie gave us detailed feedback on a lot of the individual elements of the original Jamboard exercise. And so without imposing too much structure, we just sort of want to throw it open. First of all, maybe go back. Is there one of these? Do you want to, we can go through these as they're listed here. We can pick the easy one out first or pick the hard one out first. Do you have any feelings about that?
As far as I'm concerned, let's just start at the top. We're going to go through all of them, right?
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
All right, so provide water users with flexibility to comply with new regulations and respond to changing water availability. So what I sort of want to know is, since that's obviously the goal of any water marketing strategy, where, what do you worry about, right? So what are the things there's a trade-off between flexibility and potential impacts. So what are the things that cause you concern? What are the things we need to avoid? And how much, in other words, how much do you need to constrain flexibility on the part of water users in terms of transfers?
Go ahead.
I think it has to be, that's one of the things that's working with Fox Canyon is they started out really small and tested it, because in working with farmers, ranchers, when you put out one rule and then have to go back and change it, it is really, really, really difficult. So I think that flexibility is great, but I think it should be this one worked for 2 miles, so now let's try 3, or it worked for 5, let's try 10. I think that it has to start small.
And I am, and not to say I'm correct, or that Sophie could be wrong, but I'm the opposite of that. I'm thinking start wide and go down. Only because I want to give the farmer every opportunity he can, because in some cases, let's say we're 5-10 years down the road and realize, oh, I guess we could have moved water that far. Well, it may be too late at that point for that person. So that's how I look at it.
And the other thing is by having a little bit more openness and so on, it allows you to see what are the effects of doing this. And you can find, okay, the shortcomings or not of this particular strategy. And as long as you're modeling it, so on, and monitoring it, I think it allows you a little bit more, how would you say, okay, yeah, we tried that. We can see this is the trend. We don't like what we're seeing here. Or you could say, you know what, that really didn't make any difference. In which case, then you didn't have these constrictions, because if you place them, very tight initially, I think there's some things that may be somewhat common sense, as we were talking about the direction of flow of water. You know what I'm saying? It's just because there may not be the depth of water and so on available. But I think Outside of that, I think we should try to keep it somewhat wide as long as it's within the basin. Again,
So it does seem like that so flexibility is one of them and adaptability is the other. And so the SOPI and others that advocate for the start small and expand, I sort of wonder, is there a degree of adaptability that would make you more comfortable with greater flexibility, right? So for example, if there is a process of annual review and reauthorization, would that alleviate concerns about, adverse impacts?
My concern is I go to the GSA meetings where we're bringing in outside people who haven't been working on it. And you try and change their allocation by a nano bit and they freak out. And so to come back to them after 6 months and say, oh, we made a mistake, all of our indications are it's not working this way, I think will prove absolutely disastrous. And so I feel really strongly about this one.
Nichols has his hand up. Chuck, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, without, getting bombarded for bringing this up, but we talk about flexibility, but two of the first four things on these Jamboard comments were a transaction process to move water out of the GSP, avoid that limits flexibility, and avoid permanent transfers with the initial program. Now, I'm not advocating for either one of those things, but I don't think we can talk out of both sides of our mouth and say we want a flexible program, except we're gonna take all the flexibility out of it. So we gotta be honest with ourselves. Do we really want flexibility initially or not? And I would tend to be in the camp of starting a little bit slower, but somewhere in the middle, probably. If we go too slow, you could have some enormous impacts that would last for years or decades. If you go too fast and allow permanent transfers, people could lose out before they have any idea what the impacts are. So I think flexibility sounds great, but rubber on the road is a little bit harder to determine exactly what you mean by it.
I also think too, we need to be clear about so there is sort of a binary decision about flexibility. Are you going to allow transfers of pumping between different operators, right? And there's flexibility if you do, and there's not flexibility if you don't. And then once you decide to do transfers, there's a spectrum of flexibility based on the rules, right? And so I guess the question then is, so this is already, we're obviously hitting on one where there's conflicting views. And so what's the, is the answer the middle ground position between the two, or, what's the, how do you resolve the conflict? Yeah.
in my opinion, I think you need to, how would you say, keep it a little bit more open and allow each particular subgroup to make the determination. You know what, we want to make it a little more constrictive. In other words, if they feel that it's necessary, and whether it be the mid or the east or the greater, they say, you know what, we're fine with this openness, but we really don't want stuff moving from the northern part of our district, how would you say, to the southern and vice versa, for example, okay, all the way across the mid. And so to let the individual GSAs then make their own constraints that could be more confining, but basically take the method, if you will, like the United States. You have this, you have our basic federal laws and so on, but then states can move within those laws, even become more constrictive if they feel it's necessary for the interests of the people that within their group that for whom they serve. That would be my opinion.
Question I would ask though.
I just don't want where I live to be California, where I farm to be California.
Question I would ask, since we have 3 GSAs and you only have one base, whatever one GSA does affects the other 2 GSAs. It has to be, in my opinion, a uniform approach. And if it's a uniform, let's make it a wide view, then all the GSAs have to go into that. Because if one GSA says, I'm going to pump a lot of water, it affects all the GSAs. It affects the basin.
I think maybe, I'm thinking about once we're in compliance, not in this transition phase. So overpumping is not an option. Right. Yeah, so I think it limits that a little bit, yeah.
Right.
It's gonna take 20 years to get from overpumping to not overpumping. So we're in transition for 20 years. Basically, we're in transition for a lifetime in terms of
Down to 18 now, two's already gone by.
18, okay.
Right. Right,
And
but
we're no
still,
closer to compliance.
yeah, well, the thing is I'm saying is, I think if we set some sort of a, for in its entirety, we can make it more constricted. I'm not saying an individual GSA can make it more open beyond the confines of what we all, what we come to, what we agree. I don't know, that's just my opinion.
My first question was, how united should this be? I mean, can we come up with 3 different marketing plans for the Kaweah Basin? That's what I was asking in the beginning. And what I'm sort of hearing is, thanks for the structure, and we'll kind of make it 3 different GSAs marketing plans. And so maybe
Well,
that's a bigger
But I
question.
have a question. Don't the same potential conflicts between stakeholder groups apply in all 3?
Not really.
No?
I mean,
Okay.
when you look at it as a percentage, for example, here in the mid-kaweah, what percentage of their ground is so-called white ground?
Yeah. Small, single digit percentage.
Percent,
No.
5% maybe,
Yeah,
maybe 5%. What percentage in the greater Kaweah is white ground?
big. Yeah.
Substantial. Yeah, and the east, I mean, and so that's where I'm coming from. I don't think, I can almost assure you that our board is not going to go along with some things that are placed upon it just in the interest of getting along. Because we have too many people here that their livelihoods are at stake. And each of these individuals on there are representing a group of people. Myself, I'm technically the stakeholder representative. What does that mean? The white guys, white land, not white guys, white land. Okay. So you understand where I'm coming from.
So what you're saying is do an overall plan, and then each GSA could then say, I'm gonna make it more restrictive for our GSA, but here's the plan for all the markets.
And within us, I think we can agree to certain things. For example, are we going to allow water to leave the basin? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, there are a number of things. And then in terms of the marketing, yes, we like to be able to market, but there may be some things that our particular GSA or maybe yours says, you know what, we're cool with that, but we don't think that we should be allowing, water to be sold on the northern part of our GSA and coming to the southern part of our GSA, which is, 30 miles away. Do you see what I'm saying? It's too open.
I think actually where you guys are taking us right now is we went well beyond the guiding principle, and now we're into, okay, in my mind, what I'm hearing, my viewpoint of, go back with the flexibility is, the test is, we will consider something, this group, if it provides flexibility to comply with Sigma. So if there's an element, one of the decisions to be made, like you guys are talking about, like transfer distances or whatever, if it provides flexibility for that to comply with Sigma, you will take it up for consideration and make a decision on it. So the test is, does it provide flexibility? Yes, we will consider it. And then you can decide how you want to do it. But if you're saying, if the test is, we want to consider something and it's not providing any flexibility, and I don't even know what that is. I don't know what a decision, it might actually be more constraining or whatever. Then you wouldn't, it's that initial, we don't even need to worry about it because it doesn't even meet the first test of flexibility. Okay. Then the question becomes, how much flexibility is how you make the decision on the individual item.
And I was going to say this, then the test of how much flexibility, there's other tests like this one, right? Can the committee identify in principle and then later spatially and temporally what it is that we have to avoid with respect to disadvantaged communities, groundwater dependent ecosystems, et cetera, right? So in other words, can we, as a principle, can we agree to try and achieve the greatest flexibility conditional with avoiding?
So I have a question on that one. We already know what to do with the disadvantaged communities and the groundwater It's in the rules of Sigma already, but the small farms, I guess I need clarification on.
So I have a question about the disadvantaged communities, though. Is it?
There's water quality and things of that nature.
Right.
And
So that will be a test for transfers of pumping. Do transfers of pumping have adverse impacts on those measurable outcomes, right?
they could, that's why you want to avoid those.
Yep.
So I mean, I think we all kind of understand what we got to do as far as those go.
Yeah.
The small farms, though, I'm not sure how we avoid the risk on those guys.
So that is it's an issue that's coming up statewide. Actually, if you read the comments from one of our members, it's a hard one. I say all farms are farms. So that's just my personal opinion. It gets really difficult. Who's small at the table, who's medium, and who's big? And then why don't we just call them farms? Right. And
yeah, so where we see this one. So this dynamic is the biggest challenge that we still face in Fox Canyon. And it's actually because really large farms, in case it's not necessarily large farms, it's actually large packer shippers that have contracts with a bunch of farms, some of which are large, some of which are small. They actually have the ability to restrict farmers' ability to participate in the market, right? So they actually have means to prevent them from participating. They also have means through the aggregation of allocations to potential, to capture such a large share of the total allocation that they can basically corner the market. If there's any financial gain to be had from trading, they're going to extract all the gain, right? So if there's a spread between the bid and the ask, they're going to get all of it, and because they can effectively manipulate the price and also manipulate people's ability to participate. And so the small farmers feel like, well, this is silly. I don't even have an opportunity to participate. I can't play. So there's flexibility available to some operations and not to others. And so that's a big one. So a very large part. So this was a very big fear in stakeholders in Fox Canyon. As a result, a very large number of decisions about the structure of the market were made to address that. And we did it very, very, very effectively. And we know that because now those big operators are going outside the market, trying to game the system on other parameters, mostly through well aggregation, right? They're trying to get the flexibility in the allocation system, not in the market. And so I guess I'd be curious to hear, is that dynamic something that you worry about here?
I worry about it a lot because there are big pension funds that own tons of money. We've got the Boswell, we've got several farmers that can outbid anybody and everything and then own the water and own the valley. And they don't live here, they don't contribute here, they aren't part of the society. So I feel like it's huge. I think it's a responsibility that we have to not destroy the fabric of our society.
In my mind, what I just heard a lot of this conversation, not any one particular person, Matthew, that's why this committee is so important, is because that the rules you set are going to determine how that all plays out in the next 5 to 10 years. And once you monetize the resource, there's a separate side on the ledger column that now folks are going to be playing in. So, but we got to get past the flexibility, right? The flexibility one. But I think Matthew brings up a good point, is that each principle plays on each other. So if you gain flexibility but it doesn't fit another one, it still gets tossed out. You're just trying to make a filter so that you're not taking up everything, is the way I look at the guiding principles, because you're going to have a lot on your plate anyway.
Let me ask you this. Yeah. If you take a large view, does that help speed the process along? Because you're not getting into the weeds and the detail by making a smaller plan. I mean, what's the most effective way to get where everybody wants to get, and to get this committee, the water marketing started? Take a bigger view. Does that speed up the process? Because we're not in that weed issue.
Well, so I'm hoping, so for example, here, I'm hoping to take a big view. Like a fundamental question is mitigating risks to small farms, is that a principle that we need to commit to or not, right? And obviously, if the answer is no, then that simplifies. If it is, then it will set aside a number of different. So, for example, so when you look at this review of markets, you're going to see that the overwhelming majority of adjudicated basins that have market structures have informal markets. There's not a central place you go to make bids on water or to offer water. That it's simply bilateral sort of coffee shop trades, right? You find somebody, you talk with a fellow grower. Hey, do you have some water? What would you be willing to sell it for? And those informal markets tend to be completely dominated by large operators. Small farmers just don't even have access. So for example, if protecting small farmers is that their access to the market and to market participation is a priority, then it suggests a more formal market structure, right? Where there's a formal governed process for participating so that the basin can ensure everyone has access. Yeah.
So I think by definition, I think you explained to us what a small farm and a large farm was a couple meetings ago.
Yeah.
99% of everybody in the basin is considered a small farm.
Okay.
So if that's the route you want to go, you might as well just name out the ones you don't want playing and go, you guys are out.
Okay. So I mean, so again, does everyone agree with that characterization that we're not worried about power, sort of influence and power dynamics between different operations in the basin?
Did you have another?
I don't think we're talking about that at all, but I think your small farm nomenclature would tend to just pit growers against one another. I think the real issue here is that we have an equitable basis for a guiding principle, is that you have an equitable water market with access to all. And it doesn't matter if they're small farmers or large farmers. But as soon as you introduce a small farmer, then you have to define what a small farm is. And that's pretty difficult to do in a county where there's 150 different crops being grown. We don't have the situation where packing houses control water. That may be, when water's tighter, that may happen in the future. But I don't think it's the situation in Tulare County and Kaweah and Kings County now. If you did have to pick, a definition of a small farmer versus a large farmer, I think immediately you're going to have, separate the room into sides of the room that are going to be suspicious of each other. And I don't think we want to go down that path.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So the term would have to be farmer.
Well, so actually, let's just do this. So, and you can type, right? Let's just get rid of small farms here, and then let's go to.
Wait, you want me to change on the fly?
Yep.
Okay. Where's my mouse? What do you want to change it to?
Just get rid of small farms.
You just want to oh yeah, get rid of it all.
Yeah. And then see if the next. Okay, great. And then go down to.
If I could add one more thing, Matthew, while we're
Please.
I don't think that the DACs and GDEs are third parties either. They're an integral part of the system. They're stakeholders like other water users are.
Okay, great. You can get rid of third parties. And we're going to put this back up so you can see it in a second.
Hey, Chuck, what were those acronyms you used just now?
DACs and GDEs. So DAC is disadvantaged community.
It should be not groundwater dependent ecosystem. It's just
Okay. Yeah, forgive me. I didn't catch the letters.
And then GDEs is groundwater dependent ecosystem. And really that language is coming from the Water Commission and the way they're evaluating market structure.
No, I missed what he said.
I think you're good though. Look, it doesn't matter. You're good.
No, but I have to screen share.
Oh, you are. Look, it's up there. They're not
No,
changing.
no, the
Oh, okay.
folks online can't see
Oh,
it.
okay. You can't see it online.
Well, okay.
Awesome. All right. So anticipate and mitigate the risks of adverse impacts to disadvantaged communities and the environment, and mechanisms which address impacts as they're revealed. I wanted to go, will you click in it so I can advance it? I wanted to go to this one because we did put in here an open process that includes the full range of potential market participants. And here, in addition, the water market should mitigate market power, the ability of certain participants to limit the participation of others. How would we rewrite that so that it's sort of salient to this group? That's not how you said it just a moment ago online. That was, you said it much better than that, about just making sure everyone has access. You want to repeat what you said?
You're gonna have to go back and look at the tape, Aaron.
I luckily, Chuck, it was so poignant, I wrote it down.
Yeah.
Chuck, you said that the market should be equitable and accessible to all.
Okay, so I would change that last sentence to the water market the water market strategy should be equitable and accessible to all.
Well, does everybody like that? Okay. So in addition, the water market should be equitable. and accessible.
Yeah, accessible to all. Good. Now we're going to learn how well Aaron spells on the fly. Yeah, looks good.
He's an engineer, so the bar's pretty low.
Hey, wait a second, your mic was on.
Questions? Are there any comments that are coming in here?
Yeah, there are a
Yeah.
couple.
Great.
Let me pick up on them really quick, but get this shared up there. And get the comments up. Let me pull the comments up really quick or screen share. Oh, shoot, now I took them off. We got quite a bit. We talked about that one. What
Well,
was
looking
the average acre foot use per acre of the?
Wow, so actually, great question. So this is another one that, shoot, so another one that we've been researching, and we will report. It's in the report. I didn't make a slide. The Pajaro Valley
yeah.
actually developed a plan for a fallowing program and did the most thorough job that I've seen anybody in terms of evaluating what the potential costs and impacts are. They don't actually have a fallowing program. It's just a plan to do one. So that's an excellent question. What's interesting is, first of all, in the fallowing program that I highlighted, we have no idea how much water was actually saved and what the water use was on the ground before that. And this is one of the limitations of auctions, is that there's very little certainty about how much water is actually saved, right? Because all someone is doing is saying, this is the amount of money that I'm willing to receive to forego a rotation. And so just so you have a sense of some numbers, the cost comparison is pretty dramatic. So they estimated that in the Pajaro Valley,
Well, different crop,
yeah, but basically it's the crop that determines how much water you see, obviously, right? And so first of all, they believed that the water savings, they ran different scenarios depending on which ground you secured, could be basically between 0 and 4 acre feet, and that when you look at that, that basically the cost for a unit of water could be anywhere from $250 to $7,000 per acre. And so in terms of per acre feet, that ends up being about $465 to $3,000 an acre foot of water saved. So I mentioned all that just to mention the range is just tremendous, right?
But I think anybody would want to trade is, what is this ground? How much water is allocated to this ground? Then you submit your bid, and basically what you're doing is you're saying,
all the
I'll retire this, and along with it comes this many acre feet.
Yep.
This is what my allocation is. This is what I'm willing to give up. And so the cost is determined not by the acres, but by the number of acre feet that are being given up.
Yep.
Some of the acre feet have to be left. You can't have fallowed ground with no water on it. That you're gonna not.
Well, and actually, just the Pajaro Valley one's great because it actually assumes that they must do a certain amount of irrigating to maintain a cover crop. So theirs is a covered fallow program.
So you don't just leave it.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Fallowed
cases-
land doesn't make any sense at all. It goes against air quality. It goes against everything. And so the idea is which there are a lot of us working really hard on, how can we take the fallow ground and make some kind of habitat out of it that works for the farmer and doesn't have noxious weeds growing into his property? How do we do that? Well, we can't do that without any water. So you can't just take all the water away, and it can't happen. I mean, we'd have, well, we've seen how that's happened before when we did that.
We got more problems. So we got one comment. I bet I can guess 3 out of the 4. I don't know what that's.
Oh, 3 out of the 4 operators.
Who bought
Oh,
the,
who fallowed or who bought, yes,
Who bought
thank you.
the-
Who
Yeah.
bought the water? Yeah, this 12,000 acre.
You guys are all talking and I can't, I'm visually challenged. I can't hear.
Okay, I'm sorry. Johnny said, I bet I can guess 3 out of the 4 that bid on that
12,000
Buena Vista.
acre feet. Yeah.
And Stacy, if I recall correctly, a large portion of that 500 acres had salinity issues, which made farming difficult.
Yep.
So those guys were the ones that put in under the bid.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Makes sense.
Chris Tomlinson, I may have missed it, but how can I get
Great question.
we will get that out. It'll be on the website, Chris, under the Tulare Irrigation District website. We'll put it up there.
And just so folks know, that was in was it December 15th?
Okay,
Let me just check.
presentation.
Let me make sure. Yes.
So if you want to see it, it's in the December 15th. If you go on the website now, you'll find it on the December 15th presentation. Can you replant a 20-year-old orchard? Oh, you can't replant a 20-year-old orchard. Yeah. Just because the rules change year to year. You can always tighten the rules if you begin to see undesirable results. Yeah, okay. So I think that was part of that discussion we had earlier. You can add small farms to the disadvantage list depending on how the rules are set. It's interesting you say that, Johnny, because I was telling Matthew that I sit on a couple committees, and interestingly enough, that small farmer issue, it's like the biggest discussion in each one of those. In the multi-benefit committees I sit on, this money of retiring ground, well, you need to somehow incorporate the small farmer in that. And that, so how do you define that? Well, no one is yet. It's actually spiraled into a disaster of a discussion. And on the, oh, is there a beeping noise? Is there a problem? Okay. On the California Water Commission, on the ad hoc committee I serve on, we spend more time dealing with that one issue with 0 results because no one has a definition. USDA has a generic definition that when we looked at it, everybody in the room said doesn't work.
That got put in there as a feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Dave Runston, the gentleman who brings it up the most, I think he does have a valid point there. But I agree that, and he agreed that in our sub-basin, it's probably not as large an issue as it is in, say, Fresno County. Like if I drive down Jensen Avenue, there's a huge amount of farming on 2 acre, 3 acre, and they're Hmong and they're small, and like he said, and I don't know if it's an access to the market, a fair access to the market, or they're going to get played, or I don't know, not sure what the issue is, but he's just saying, putting up the flag that those folks may not have equal access. However, I think what Chuck's saying is that it's incumbent upon us to make sure that they do have equal access to it. And it's solved, so.
Yeah, and I think I like framing it the way we did.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
And Aaron, there's a difference between access and usage. You know, a lot of small farmers don't work full-time at farming. And so you have to distinguish between access and use. And a lot of times people have access to things, but they don't make use of them. And I'm not talking about farming, or I'm just talking about things in general. And you have to make sure that you provide access, but you don't have to, do the process for people. They have to go out and do it themselves.
Yeah. There was one comment. So one of the sticky notes placed in the Jamboard said market. We want to avoid a market where pricing is bid up to a point where small farmers are left out. So I don't know if the person that wrote that's in the room, you don't have to identify yourself. I just want to throw out as a rhetorical question. Does our rewording about equitable and accessible cover that, right? Does that cover whatever the person meant when they wrote pricing's bid up to a point where small farmers are left out?
That was my comment.
That was your
That's the same comment I've been making all afternoon.
So do you, did we cover it with?
You know, it's how it plays out.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it is you're gonna make the decision, is it equitable? If it's equitable, then that small farmer should be able to get in there, get his water and get out. Now, you have to recognize the price may be high, but he doesn't need a lot. So by total, it's.
He
Well,
can
that's
always
not
sell
fair
his water.
because he has less land and so he's gonna get less back, so.
No, but as far as purchasing the water, he's not buying a bigger block. So the check he has to write per acre foot will be the same as everybody else, but he doesn't write as big of a check. He still gets his water supply.
He gets less money back because he has smaller return.
I would beg to differ on some, I would,
Acre, he will have, he'll have the same return on the acreage.
some of those small vegetable guys, the return on the small acreage could be bigger than the return on the, right? Yeah.
Good point. I. see
Some of those vegetable guys that I, can get up there. Like I've talked to some Hmong farmers, and remember, they only farm on that small acreage seasonally and they get a pretty good.
And the reason they don't expand is because their market is limited.
They're not gonna compete with a Driscoll. They just need to make sure that northern part of Hanford comes to that strawberry stand and they do a very good job at it. Yeah. And the other thing that the GSAs need to discuss, and I think we've done it at the mid-kaweah, is are we really targeting, like, we want a level playing field with those folks, but again, as you look at the mid-kaweah, we're really looking at 4 acres and larger, right? Because that needle on that small is not gonna throw you into unsustainability at that point. So
there's a way to have a market that's not always driven by the highest price.
And that,
I think that's where Sophie's
Plays out, yeah.
going to. And that, what that looks like, depends on how we develop it. But,
Yeah. The challenge is the seller always wants the high side.
but depending on if it's, like a stock market or something like that, then, depending on how many people want that, those prices may fluctuate.
Yeah.
And it's not just a one for, I'm selling my water and it's this much, and so only so-and-so can buy it. It depends on how we develop that market.
Yeah, and this is way too early to talk about it in any detail, but we actually use a pricing algorithm to match where they split the spread actually, so that they both, you may be willing to pay a certain price, but you actually get it for substantially less than that, right? You might be willing to sell it for a really low price, but you get substantially more than that. So, were there other comments? Or rather, chat?
I think that the other one was, Stacey Ann said that the Community Alliance on Family Farmers has a documented definition of small farms. Probably could look that up.
Yeah, great.
But I think, Stacey Ann, we've kind of decided to take it out.
Yeah.
So I don't think we.
That
but
was a
just
null
as
comment.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but as background, we should familiarize ourselves with what that is, right?
If GSAs force all transfers to happen via the online or office trading platform, it will eliminate the need for small farm.
Yep. It can.
It's that accessible.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So why don't we go back, close that down and go back. So obviously what's been really good about this so far is that, first of all, we're generally simplifying, we're removing language as opposed to adding it. The other thing is we're identifying where sometimes we're thinking about, when we read the Jamboard comments, we're running it through a filter. We've been working with the Water Commission. We've been running, and it might mean something totally different to you than it did to us. So I want to start at the top again. So is there anything missing? Is there anything that needs to be reworded? This is flexibility. Is there a better way to capture this? Can we say something more definitive, like we're committed to providing the greatest degree of flexibility, conditional on the other principles, on doing no harm, on equity and inclusion?
I'm going to just do this.
Manual with that one, given that, well, I think with at least with self enterprise, a lot of things are already losing water. We have to balance with the food back. year before in Toledo, some of the plan, had been approved. And I think maybe some of them aren't because they're not fully including protections. But I'm referring to the GSP because they're not protecting disadvantaged communities. So I don't think Sigma is necessarily doing the job it's meant to do perfectly.
Yep.
But I think there needs to be more of an emphasis on that.
Okay, and those are talking about where local pumping troughs
Yes.
are drying out wells.
There are some communities who have community wells, and when their wells go dry, several hundred of residents are going without water for days, if not maybe months, that can be years at a time. I personally experienced that. It's not a pleasant feeling.
So is there a way that anything you would add or change here? Can we be even more definitive?
I would just comment that I think where we end up on MOs and MTs, we're gonna handle that.
Okay.
And that's currently being adjusted.
Correct.
Yeah. Is that also going to handle the concerns of disadvantaged communities in the environment?
What I heard from DDVR was not DAX only or whatever else. It said users and uses. They really differentiate. I mean, they call out DAX specifically, but in conversation with them, they didn't really care. So I think whatever investments get made probably handle that.
Any other thoughts or comments on that? Reactions? Okay.
It was really hard to hear.
That's what I was gonna say.
Paraphrase that.
What?
They didn't differentiate between MOs and, I'm sorry.
Minimum threshold.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about on every question we ask them.
DWR.
The answer is always users and uses. And they didn't really single out whether it was a DAC.
Yeah, so just Chuck, so the comment was made is there a specific protection for DACs coming strictly through the water marketing strategy? However, on the other parallel work that's going on in the DWR adjustments, we are all technically revising the MOs and MTs. And I'll just say that a lot of that reevaluation is basically the current projection is not acceptable to them. So we've got to revise those. And the general thought is they're going to come up. So as those come up, everybody's risk level comes, or risk reduction goes down because the levels that we're targeting are higher.
And does that mean that the sustainable yield goes down, or do other things go down as well?
No, just
the sustainable yield.
Yeah. So you have less to allocate, less to work with.
Right.
You're at risk quicker.
Yep.
Yeah,
so I guess
understand it as far as these guiding principles for a water marketing strategy. What we want to do is develop a water market that does not create situations where you fail to meet objectives of the GSA as regards to disadvantaged communities and the environmental benefits. But that's really what we're trying to do. And if we need a robust process to monitor, the GSAs are going to do this in a feedback loop so that we can adjust practices of the water market so it doesn't continue or changes or it improves, right? And I think we get a little confused as to maybe overreaching what we're trying to do with this water marketing committee. The water marketing committee in and of itself isn't solving the program. It's more of the do no harm for all the other activities that the GSA is doing to ensure compliance and accessibility to drinking water for disadvantaged communities and water for the environmental communities. Or am I wrong on that?
Well, I don't have an answer. I have a question, which is beyond MOs and MTs. I think you want to build a strategy that has broad stakeholder buy-in, right? Where the community at large can say, hey, this is a great idea. We support this, even despite some of the trade-offs, right? And so I do think you can aspire to do better than merely support the GSP.
You might have measurable, returns if it's making decisions on where you trade and you could improve the situation. That's what you're saying.
Chuck, did you have a reaction to that?
I don't think anybody in the communities really cares as long as they turn their faucet on and clean drinking water comes out, quite frankly. You know, in terms of the, you know, environmental users, you know, and not to pick on anybody, there's never any satisfaction there, but we certainly don't want things to, you know, get worse than they are or will continue in the absence of the GSA activity. But I really think if it depends on the community. If we're talking about the community of users of water, yes. If we're talking about, you know, the community in large and most of the people that live in Visalia and Tulare and the other communities, I don't know how concerned or how involved they're going to get in this. I really think that's probably an overreach, at least initially.
So you wrote a grant application that included input from disadvantaged communities, environmental groups, you know, from a broad stakeholder. So what?
I mean, I think what we're doing is we're doing it right now.
Yeah.
So we're going to set up guiding principles, and everybody has, you know, say. So if we want to wordsmith this right now, we wordsmith it. But at the end of the day, sorry. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to say you know, and we might be here right now because everyone says, I don't want to add another word. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm in another venture. When we start getting into wordsmith thing, be careful because you know, change this and that. But if we're going to start moving forward, we as a group need to say thumbs up or thumbs down on this list and get going. And I'm going to tell you right now, you folks, I can sense from your discussion, your involvement, your thoughtfulness, it's going to work out given once you start making say you talk about how far you want to transfer it. There's going to be a good discussion here about, is 3 the number and 4 the number? Hey, go get the technical team and show us what 3 looks like. Show us what 4 looks like. I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is we don't get a thumbs up or a thumbs down on this list today.
If we're talking about that in terms of guiding principles, there's a couple things up here that I haven't seen. And one of them is what was talked about earlier today, which is the water marketing system needs to be something, a template that can be used by all 3 GSAs. It may not have 100% utility for all of them, but it needs to have a common framework between the 3 GSAs. That's what I understood was one of our tasks when we first started this at the beginning.
Yep, I like it. You're right. That's a gaping hole in what's up there.
You want to add it?
Yeah, and then real quick,
I would agree with you.
change the last sentence of equity and inclusion. We can do it. We'll need to copy and paste from the.
Yeah, but you want to add.
Yeah, that's a great one. That was the other question we had for the group is what else is missing? That's surely not the only thing that's missing. You know, because the Jamboard exercise obviously produced a number of comments focused in specific areas, but I'm sure there's other things that are missing.
And I'll add one other, and I guess I would start that by saying what it's not. I think we can't guarantee, we can't build a water market that guarantees the financial success of all farmers. What we can do is try and build one that's you know, the lowest cost economically and fairly determines the value of water, so people don't overpay, and people that are following land don't get less value or more value than what they're you know, what they're doing towards balancing the water basin or water market. So I think there needs to be some sort of economic guiding principle in there that encompasses something. You know, there were some comments from the whiteboard exercise. I'm not quite sure exactly how you do it, but I think it's also important to say what it's not, because I see comments about guaranteeing, you know, financial success for if you start getting into, and you're really opening Pandora's box, because, you know, none of the irrigation districts ever did that. And they're not going to in a water market either.
Yep. And Chuck, so Aaron just wrote financial equitable system. That's not quite what the spirit of what you were going for. I think your point is simply that we're actually going to discover the price of water and allow people to react to that. So can you restate what you said?
Well, a market where buyers of pumping credits and sellers of pumping credits, there's a price discovery process that's equitable for both sides. Because it's not what you had in the example in 2014 in Brenda Mesa, where the sellers got 3 million, the buyers paid 13 million, and the district got 11 million. There's something out of balance there.
I agree.
Example.
We're trying to investigate that because our minds were like, what happened here? Because if TID was in the middle of that, you guys would be screaming at me, where'd that money go?
Well, Aaron, if it went to buy water to bring into the district, then it's reasonable, right?
Fair, but I'm thinking that one didn't.
No, because they were selling water that could have been brought into the basin, right?
Yeah, they're selling it at they're buying it at a high rate and selling it.
All right, so why don't we change this real quick? So go to the equity inclusion one real quick, and then copy what the rewrite. So go down a few slides. Copy that, and we'll paste it in, and then we're going to have to do the one above it too. It's gonna blow up. That's fine. Oh, it didn't. Great.
On the do not harm, should we just go with users? Like Craig was saying?
So that's an interesting question. So I guess the way I would think about it is, do you want to court the buy-in of disadvantaged communities and environmental interests, right? Because I agree they could potentially be captured in users. The question is how comfortable do you want them to feel with the process, right?
Well, I think it's fine listing them. But if you add,
users
to that,
then you could say including DACs and the environment. To adverse impacts to water users. Including. And then the other one too, I would ask, some of this is redundant. Like there it says, the strategy should create mechanisms which address impacts as they're revealed. That's supposed to be captured in adaptability. So can we strike that sentence? Can we? So hearing no objection, I'm going to do that.
He did it, not me.
So we can undo. So flexibility seemed like people were comfortable with. Does that mean what does that mean? 3 chats? 3?
No, I have a grammar checker.
Oh, you do? Okay.
So I have 3 mistakes somewhere on the sheet.
Okay. All right. So how about adaptability? This is written as the water market should anticipate adjustments in practices, rules, and procedures. I hear Soapy's voice saying, but it's very difficult to take flexibility back once you've given it. But we need to have a procedures and we need to respond as conditions change and new information becomes available, in particular, available information about impacts to users. So
David, this is the exact conversation we had on the mid-kaweah water emergency ordinance, is that we gotta start, but we're gonna adaptively manage it. And the mid-kaweah board is gonna have to make tougher decisions.
We could just move on past that one right now because it's just a knob that's going to have to turn.
Okay. You're giving yourself a knob.
Okay, so is there anyone want to add or take anything away? Okay, great.
On the do no harm.
Yeah.
I don't. What does the environment mean in the context of this? That's a pretty broad statement. And we're saying we're going to anticipate and mitigate risks of adverse impacts. That could be almost anything. It's just very, very broad. I understand very clearly what a disadvantaged community is. And we know what that is, and we can all picture it, and we live in them. But the environment, that's just an extremely broad statement. So I think there needs to be some sort of, and I'm not against it. I just would like to see it a little bit better defined.
Well, so notice the pendulum swung. We started with something really specific, which is highlighted by the Water Commission and others, which was groundwater dependent ecosystems, right? So that's where there's a surface water groundwater interaction that has, not necessarily. So there could be a surface water groundwater interaction. It could just be there's some ecosystem that depends on that's sensitive to groundwater levels. Right? So we went from very, very specific to very, very broad. Is there a middle ground, or is there something entirely different that belongs there?
It's out of my realm of expertise.
Me too.
Most of my patriots in the caucus are going to say they need some definition. I'm not feeling that I'm the one that can give you the words.
Okay.
That's what I was going to just say is established environmental habitat. So we're saying that the stuff that we've got out there, we've got to protect.
Well, you also have to protect what you're going to now repurpose.
And that would be established, right? So we establish it.
It's not established now. It's got orange trees on it.
Realm of the, okay. It's established and future planned environmental habitat. So would established
and repurposed farmland.
Do you mean restored? What is restored habitat? Would that capture it?
Yeah. It's.
Can I throw a caveat at this though?
Yeah.
So what happens if somebody decides that, you know what, I'm just gonna market my water, but I'm not gonna put habitat, I'm gonna put solar panels. I'm gonna have a 1,000-acre solar farm here.
That's okay. So what we're saying is, hey, there are a lot of ways you can do solar panels. So you can just do solar panels and herbicide the bejesus out of the soil, or you can provide a habitat that allows other things to exist there.
But
and that takes water.
Is it our purpose though to mandate? In other words, if we're trying to get the most bang for the buck, and herbicides initially, for the most part, take care of it.
Not okay. That's like saying,
Well, see, that's
we're gonna
why.
get our most.
Well, I mean, the
bucks and
thing
you don't
is
get any
but
water. That didn't work.
yeah, well, see, that's where we come from opposite sides
Yeah.
of the spectrum.
It's another one that's interesting that we did in Fox Canyon's a little different. And we had very strong environmental representation in the stakeholder group. Was we approached it from water levels and water quality, right? So rather than giving something open-ended, the environmental interests were happy as long as we were monitoring water quality and water levels and the effects of transfers of pumping, right? Further, we got buy-in from environmental stakeholders by saying we're not just going to do no harm, we are actually going to try to positively impact the distribution of water quality with the rules of the market. And so this kind of gets back to the MOMT thing, right? It could be, rather than calling it the environment, it could be specific measurable outcomes.
I can see the measurable outcomes. I mean, that's repurposing of land.
Can't hear you,
RCIS.
Sophie. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I lost my voice the last couple weeks.
Okay.
I
can't hear
I'm
you.
saying yes, you definitely do that we're using specific words like repurposing of the land. And so you have to have sufficient water to do that. The 3 GSAs have been looking at the RCIS as a way of taking multiple multiple retired lands and putting them together so that we can create something that is a habitat and a use of the land. All that takes some water. So that's all I'm saying is you can't just strip it and say, we don't care. Whether it's solar panels or whatever, it's repurposing.
Well,
That's
that's what's happening to us when we're having to fallow land for production. So I guess the question I have is how much pumped groundwater goes to environmental purposes at present? Do we have any definition of that? That's what we're trying to address, isn't it?
There's some different numbers on that, and I could certainly work with the CAP to get those. There's all kinds of, the difference depends on where you are too, and the type of soils, just like with the citrus. I mean, it's different, but I could try to get a definition for what they're using if there is one. I don't know.
Well, like we just went out to, it was interesting because we went out to the Atwell Island tour and Jeff, what's his name? The BLM guy that set that all up said, the biologist said that in there, so it depends on the quality and what you're setting up as a habitat. But I would say that SOPI and SRT have been actually the only reasonable conversation that in the RCIS, we got into a big argument because the RCIS folks told us we don't need water for habitat. And we said that is so false because what happens is your habitat fails because you can't survive a drought. And that biologist out there said the same thing. He goes, manage your expectations. You're not getting habitat with native species. You're getting habitat, but it's all weeds because it chokes out the native. So you can't, unless you apply groundwater, but that's not going to be what you want to do. So I think this water marketing strategy is what it's trying to say is when we start moving water around, we can't take that water from existing habitat and then leave it in a state that it, but in its system, the way I looked at it is that parcel, Kaweah Oaks Preserve, Atwell Island, although Atwell Island is not within our area, will have its allocation, will have its place in the market, and then you look at your credit. So if you're looking at Kaweah Oaks Preserve, you're saying, okay, how much you might do a little irrigation out there, right? Because you got something, it's a farm managed system.
Well, it depends on whether you're deciding that the oaks are dying and you want to replant oaks. You need to, in order to do that.
And Kaweah Oaks Preserve is now looking at putting in a recharge basin. So you're
You already
looking
have
at
one.
Oh, you already have one.
It's expansion.
So what's going to happen is they want to be a part of that market because what happens is they're going to build credits in the system. So I look at it kind of differently. We keep talking about protecting the environment. I want to give them an opportunity in the market. So I come at it from different standpoints. And in that mode, they're going to get credits. They're going to be able to trade. They're going to be able to bring in, right? So what if Kaweah Oaks Preserve starts running low on credits? Then they need to go to a neighbor and say, can you fallow out because the oak trees are going to die? And you got to play that. So I think this do no harm takes care of itself by an equitable and accessible market. Is really what happens in my mind. I might be going out on a limb.
We gotta be careful too of what we think things will be in 5 years too, right?
Yeah.
These have to be a knob that adjusts because in 5 years if ground is repurposed and we might have to adjust something to that, but we can't really write something now for that because we don't even know what's going to happen.
Well, that's having the adaptability or
We're having a hard time handling what we have already.
Yeah, well, and I think,
I don't know what it's going to be like in 5 years after we have something in place.
and I think we should just concern ourselves with the actual marketing of the water and the methodology. I think the GSAs are the ones that will determine whether or not you have to leave so much water for habitat or this or that. We'll leave that to the GSA. But I think the water marketing, we just have to have a platform. And if it's such that the Oaks Preserve or whatever needs to buy more water, then there's a market out there to do that.
And
so
Joe, I agree with
the market.
I agree with you 100%. And by the same token, if they're surplus water holders, that they have an equitable way to turn that into money to pursue their opportunities. But yeah, from a water market standpoint, I guess the line, it seemed like we went a little beyond what the scope of what we were our charter is, and I
agree.
100%.
I'll ask Aaron if he agrees with that. Do you agree with that, Aaron?
I'm only gonna agree to it if Sophie, which I trust, feels that sitting at the table and including and hearing and being able to participate is the level of participation. And that goes the same for you, Manuel. Because we build a system where you feel that it disenfranchises you, or even with a grower, then no need to proceed. But if it's not up to me, it's really up to you as a committee. I think you guys are doing a great work. And I think this mimics our advisory committee. So you're having hard discussions, you're getting in pickles here and there, finding your way out. What I'm hearing today is let's start making the decisions, right? We spend too much time on the principles, we're gonna get stuck in principles and not get to the decisions. But that's where, if you actually have a good set of principles, it helps shortcut you're not gonna have many battles over every little decision. You're gonna only pick out the top 5 that are the big ones. But I hate to then now take it off me, but I just wanna make sure you're at the table and your voice.
Well, it's not just my voice, it's a lot of other folks out there. And just like the DACs are at the table, it's because they have a voice too. And so to just say, well, it doesn't really matter because we're only interested in the farmers, doesn't really do the trick for me.
And I don't think, Sophie, that's not what we're saying. So don't put words in our mouth, please. And the disadvantaged communities, that goes beyond an economic decision. There's a legal and moral obligation there to ensure that there's adequate drinking water and safe drinking water for those communities. But I don't know that it should be a primary guiding principle of a water market to restore environmental habitat. It seems like you're comparing ducks and oranges. They're so different. And I think Joe is right. This is being addressed at the GSA and GSP level as it should be. And it's really about how the environmental water users, such as Sequoia Riverlands Trust, can either buy or sell water to achieve to their desired outcomes. We could also say, should we have a preference for small, environmental habitats and large environmental habitats, just like small and large farmers? We can start getting down to those distinctions if we want to as well. I don't want to go there. I don't think anybody else wants to. But at least on this issue, it makes more sense to talk about it in terms of having the ability for the environmental habitat and organizations that manage those to have equal access to them and fair access to the markets.
In all fairness, I don't think you're hearing me. Let me see if I can clarify. What we're looking at now is who should be considered when we are retiring and fallowing lands. So yes, the farmers need to be considered. Yes, the DACs need to be considered. And yes, the environment needs to be considered. Those 3 things are very important. So you just don't leave out one of those because somebody else is going to take care of it.
I think what we're saying, I think what this statement is saying is not that we're not carving out necessarily a special, like we got to make different special decisions. What we're saying here is, what we're saying here is that as we move forward, if there's an element that says there is an impact to any water user, right, then we can't, it's gonna be a tricky one because anything could theoretically have an impact, but we can't move it forward.
To do no harm.
Yeah. So I think that was the question, Sophie, is why not just say water users? And that gets everybody at this table.
I can't do water users because the way that could be interpreted is that the environment which is using the water isn't actually a water user. It's one thing when you're talking about KOP. It's another thing when you're retiring land, you have to leave any water on that land for whatever's going to happen in the future. So that land is not in itself sense a water user.
What you're tying into is in the segment legislation talked about beneficial users and uses
Yes.
of groundwater.
So should we, so, and you said the same.
Users and uses.
User and uses.
No more. Modify something.
Please.
Really mitigating the risk.
Yeah, that mitigate is so loaded, right?
Yes.
So let me just,
I don't know. I think reduce is loaded.
wait, let me try and get.
Because what I,
Mitigate means we're taking part of the market, we're gonna go.
so it's actually, so what, I'm the one that wrote the word mitigate. That wasn't on any of the jam boards. What I meant was anticipate and respond. So in other words, like proactively address, don't just wait, try to anticipate, okay, what could happen? And let's try and avoid it, right? So, and
Anticipate and address.
great, anticipate and address, I like it.
The risk of
To water
adverse-
users and uses. I just have a question to the non-environmental and DAC folks is, and again, just so you know, my perspective, I built a water market that was a grower-led initiative. We're going to have the last thing on the agenda is to schedule a public workshop, right? Do you want an adversary? Do you want what might be perceived as an adversarial position against other stakeholders, right? Is there a big enough? Is there a way to write this that's a big enough tent that you actually achieve buy-in of environmental stakeholders and disadvantaged communities where they're comfortable with what's being anticipated?
Well, I mean, you have both sides. You have both sides, so you can have an adversarial relationship with one or with the other. I mean, you know, that's it's going to be a given. I mean, we're, you know, the old adage, you know, what was it, whiskey and water? You know, I don't have to go about the rest of it.
I think what you've done with the do no harm though, is left a big tent by the way.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. All right, awesome. Okay. So any other?
Again, I just think that's an overly broad reach. We're going to address and anticipate the impacts to water of all uses and all users. That's very, very, very broad. And so if it's going to be a guiding principle, I need it. I thought that was pointing us in a direction. This looks like a scatter chart to me, at least that one. You know, the water marketing strategy, I like anticipate and test for risk of adverse impacts to water and water users. But you start putting all in there and all uses. That's really what you're talking about with these series of markets and year-long, you know, adapting. If something doesn't work right, you go back and you change it and correct it. But if we're saying, you know, we have, you know, 370,000 people that live in Tulare County, all of us use water, we're going to address every single person's needs. How can we even start?
But that's not even realistic, you guys. Look at Sigma. They all have overarching goals and they don't say, we're not going to pay attention to the industrial. It includes everybody. And the way this is written now should anticipate and address the risk of adverse impacts to water users and third parties. I mean, yes, that's broad, but it's an overriding principle that's supposed to say, do no harm. And that's what we're saying. Would you, I mean, what's the alternative? So we're going to say the only person that has to not get hurt is the farmers or?
Well, they're going to get hurt. They're the only people that are going to get
No,
hurt.
no, no. Everyone's getting hurt. The DACs
Yeah.
are getting hurt. The environment's getting hurt. The farmers are getting hurt. It is not one-sided. Believe me, as a rancher, I'm getting hurt.
Yes.
So
And what we're talking about is this water marketing.
And
strategy.
I'm not, Sophie, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, how can we focus it in somehow so that, you know, as we start going through these tests that we're gonna, in writing this policy, we can go back to a guiding principle and say it's of use to us. And I don't see, if we're trying to address all, anybody can point to that and say, what I'm saying is right. So if there's a way to suggest that, you know, you can focus it a little bit, I'm all for that. It's okay. It's fine when it, but I'm just trying to figure out how is it can be something that really helps us as we go through this process. Otherwise, I think we're just kicking the can down the road.
And this is one of those ones that might have to be, and we probably didn't state up front, but the guiding principles and the thumbs up, thumbs down is not once it's thumbs up that we're never gonna get back into this. You as a committee have the right to say, we need to get back into this because you can't tell what tomorrow's decisions are gonna be, whether or not it fits quite right. So I think you have the availability to say, hey, we thought that was okay, but we're gonna go back and revisit that. I think the likelihood is you're just gonna use the guidelines, start making the decisions and then go, right?
Well, and actually, if you close, just to give you a sense what the next step is, as we imagine it, click in there, is that each of these principles, after it's been rewritten, interacts with different elements of the existing water market research, right? They bear on specific choices here. Flexibility affects flexibility provided in the allocation system, what type of exchange, what are the term of transfers, right? And so we plan to come back to you with a series of decisions about different aspects of the structure and operating mechanism of a potential water market, right? And the idea is to use that guiding principle as a first filter, right? Well, we already agreed to something, and that's a little bit where the less compromise there is now on guiding principles, the more time we're going to spend, you know, talking about the minutia of specific choices, right? Let's get back up to our list.
Let's do this really quick. I think we hit I know it's pretty warm in here. Why don't we take a quick break? For 5 or 10 minutes. And then we come back. And I think what I'd like to do is, there's 2 ways to do this. We're gonna go, what do you think of the whole list? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Or we go item by item. So that I always look at this as a first test is on the big list, how many thumbs up do we have? Right? And then if we have all thumbs up, then we don't need to go item by item. Not saying if we have we can go down and see the ones we have and that agreement on. Maybe we only have one we still need to work on.
Aaron, we did say we're gonna end this meeting at 4, so are we asking folks to go on past 4 o'clock?
Yeah, we have to go beyond 4. If we don't put the time in now, we lose the time later on. And if the goal is to get this done by the end of the year, I think we need to keep going.
Okay, does everybody have time?
Is everybody okay with that? Why don't we try and do this, get to the rest of it within the next half an hour, but take a quick break. There's literally a 5-pound box of chocolate that I'm not going to eat. So you guys need to dig into it.
It may be chocolate syrup by now.
Yeah, well, that's true.
I just tested it. It's very good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that. I was like, what were you guys thinking?
Just eat strawberries.
I know. So grab something to eat. The restrooms are right here. Grab a water. 5 minutes, we'll be back.
Hey, Aaron, I did throw up one a suggested alternative language in the chat.
Great.
Test and address impacts of water users and uses. The water management strategy should measure. Test,
Chuck, is that a replacement for the do no harm or a new one?
Yes, that's for the do no harm.
So measure, test, and address. So go back to our do no harm.
We're not less than the requirements.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's more specific.
Yep. I like that, Chuck. You're hired.
earlier when I was a little nervous.
Can you throw a piece of candy through the camera?
You want to watch us eat it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
When we talk about flexibility, play with new regulations, it's about changing water levels. Very law is specific about, it's going to be addressed in measurable objectives. That's a different water supply.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting thought. I don't think you can leave it out of here because it's already in SIGMA. Because the idea is, at the end, you're going to have to communicate the water marketing strategy with stakeholders in all three basins, right? Or all three
But are we
GSAs.
talking about flexibility that allows you to bring basin to either the measurable objective or the minimum?
No, this is all about transfer. Yeah, so this is really about the ability to transfer something and to create financial incentives to adopt water saving behavior.
But if the
To do and find out what natural habitats are.
It's already.
How they handle that. The different GSAs is up to them. That way we're not restricting anybody, but we're also providing.
Yeah, so maybe do no harm. I think where you're headed, which is, so I think the way I just framed what responded to what you said was the opposite, the inverse. And I like where you're going now, where I understand you're going now, which is, I thought you were proposing if it's in SIGMA, you can pull it out. It doesn't need to be here. Where what you're saying is no. Where build it in, right? No, I like it.
SIGMA requires it.
Put it in there. Yeah, no, I think you're right. Yeah, I like it. Explicitly call it out.
That's where the water uses comes from.
Yep.
Is the regulation.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, okay. So do no harm should first have what SIGMA says, and then further, the water marketing strategy should measure, test, and address the risks and adverse impacts of water. Because that's broader than that's going to be broader than.
I guess what I'm thinking is it could be a new.
A whole new bullet. Yeah.
Water marketing, water marketing implementation should not. They don't come at the expense of one. Undesirable result over the other. I mean, that's kind of what SIGMA requires you to do. Take the granular surface water action, right, in order to.
So what's funny for us though is that anyway, so what's really funny for us, we interpreted those as hierarchical. That, for example, if you address the water level issue, you get water quality, GDP, groundwater, surface water interaction, so in other words, you can, we actually interpret it to be, well, if there's actually one threshold that if you meet it, you will meet all the others.
Kind of. You can impact water quality.
Yeah.
Through the exercise of another activity. You can mobilize a groundwater contamination plume through higher operating groundwater.
Yeah. Okay.
For that, and what kind of.
And that's where I think.
Well, we don't play Texas like anywhere at the farm.
Oh, yeah. Levels are depressed. All of these chemicals leach out of the rock.
That's up there. Check on the levels, because they have one of those, I don't know what the device called. You got like a larger device placed behind, like a building where maybe a little bit taller than I am, and you just plug it in there. And then like that's way beyond my level of understanding. But we're basically just trying to figure out, is there high levels of this in there, and also what about it.
Affects that. Yeah, then that becomes an impact.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So you should suggest this and ask if it should be integrated into a tool, or if it should be its own.
just letting everybody talk, because I was like, I want to try to read this one, but everybody talking. It felt like it was better to have the committee member weigh in. Yeah, sure. Yes.
If getting where you want to get to? Yeah, I don't. I didn't. He wants a decision this afternoon. That's fine. We didn't have to have a decision.
It appears to be a decision, and I'll set up the meeting.
Not equal, many more farmers.
What makes you choose that? Did you expect to be working with like irrigating districts?
No, I had no idea. I wanted to get involved in water because I thought it was important.
Okay, let's
But my family's had a ranch in Springville since 1958.
That's Los Angeles. Here.
Brentwood?
Oh, geez, nice area.
It was a nice area. Yeah, it's very.
We're all impacted with the
Now, the name, last name Mulholland, it's not associated with Mulholland Drive, is it?
Well, I was married to Tom Mulholland, who's
Mhm.
citrus farmer here, but it's his grandfather.
The landowner around there.
No, he's in water.
Okay.
What
do we come to?
Yes.
Oh, gee.
His father, but my family.
His grandfather, you said. or
His grandfather. My family's fifth generation California.
In here now? Sounds like it.
Fourth generation.
Now, you said 60 years?
we had the pigeons come here all day.
Bought the ranch in 1968.
We've never had an owl. We've had, well, yeah, no, owls would be good. Usually get,
Say I didn't think you were that old.
Oh,
so.
thank you for the compliment.
Yeah.
they won't. And that one that came in, they actually, yeah, if you just barely crack that door, there's about 3 or 4 pigeons around here. They just,
It's up in what area?
Springville.
okay, folks, let's run this thing home.
And we're really worried about water too,
So is
because
that where you live now then?
I do. I've lived there for
7 days. Oh, and Craig had one question too. I think it's a really good.
San Diego.
How much is gone? Not even the first layer? Or did somebody poke through to the bottom?
Are there to-go bags?
You get whatever your hands can hold and your temperature in your car can. Yeah, I'll do it. I do appreciate the conversation. It's interesting. I'm a civil engineer. And to watch these advisory committees and stuff, this is actually where I've told somebody, which I got into an argument just recently on GSA things, a knockdown, drag out, screaming fight. You have to get to that point in order to get to resolution. If everybody plays nice, you actually end up failing because everybody has this false sense that everything's okay and it's not. And I'm seeing that in other avenues right now. So you might as well put your, issues out on the table, address them now and get going. Hold on.
Addressing them, but then should we then, after we have our discussion, then go yay or nay?
I think that,
Move through them?
well, I think what Matthew was laying out here, and I hope you folks can all still hear us online, but is, what we ought to do here is let's wait for that thing. Oh, it is a bat.
There it is. Look at that.
Wow. Wow.
So what I think we're gonna do is let's figure out what we all agree upon. And Matthew said we can take the other items and we can begin to massage those where those are issues. So again, everything we want to do, we want to build through consensus, right? You don't want to leave, if you leave a vote out and there's one no, and then we just move on with that, it just creates a lingering issue out there. So
Well, I don't think you're gonna get 100% consensus.
exactly. Not right now, but on individual items, we might, right? So the goal is to try, right?
Yeah, and learn where is there greater consensus, where is there less, right?
We've already taken the discussion today and I think made this list a lot more tailored and better to what you guys are looking for. This is all about what you as committee members want, right?
And if you want to bring up your.
Okay, so I was getting back on the flexibility side and Craig was mentioning the measurable objectives and minimum thresholds. Started wondering whether or not the guiding principles should be tied to MOs or MTs, but also that led into this discussion of, do we consider that all of these guiding principles already have the undesirable results that are required under Sigma pre-baked into this, or does it need to be articulated as a guiding principle?
You faded off on the last.
The guiding, so the undesirable results that are identified in Sigma, are we considering that they're all pre-baked into whatever the guiding principles are, or do they need to, or does there need to be a principle specific to that?
I don't know that we have a choice, do we?
The MOs and MTs will be what they are, but it's a good point is, do you want a guide? Because as the MO MTs may change, what you're saying is MOs and MTs may change. Is the water marketing strategy tied to that MOMT such that the guiding principles are linked?
Well, and I was thinking of it more practically, which is, does adding the language from Sigma where it applies, will that just give a greater level of comfort for all stakeholders, right? That we are, by calling out MOs and MTs, will that sort of help bridge some of these gaps? And I see two heads nodding.
Yeah, perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's not something we have to do today. So that's something, that's instruction we can go do and add to it and bring back.
You could almost have the guiding principles, part of it could be an explanation of where these came from, and it includes the MOs and MTs that are included in Sigma, and that is understood.
Yeah, cool. And so then there's two approaches. If you have thoughts off the top of your head, share it. We can also do both if you want. One is to have a bullet, have its own standalone principle. The other one is to try and integrate the language of Sigma into each of the principles.
It's better to integrate it.
Great. Okay.
For sure.
Definitely. Okay, great. All right, cool. Excellent.
So, you want to have, a lot of times what works well is if we just go around the room, any thoughts, and then see where everybody's at. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
No, I was just gonna say, if you want to go down the.
Oh, go down the list?
List, yeah.
Okay.
Just go down the list and then we can get our thumbs up, thumbs down. And if we don't get a consensus, then I guess that's something we gotta, we need to put back out to the group and say, okay, where do you stand and so on. And then, but at some point, I don't think you're ever going to get a consensus 100%. She and I are not going to agree on a number of things. There'll be a number of things that we may, but there'll be a number of things that we won't. We'll have to come at some point to a decision.
We'll have dinner next time and you'll be surprised all of a sudden.
I'll tell you, it takes a lot.
Trying to get you.
I don't sell each one of yourselves in your relationship.
My father I was drinking wine when I was like 8 or 9 years old.
Okay, we'll have wine.
You get out the wine barrels for him.
Hey, and
I think one of the things that I brought up is that we're in sort of an interesting situation here in the sense that I was sneaking wine off the table at about the same age.
Yeah.
But we're in an interesting situation because we have almost all farmers here.
Mhm.
And so obviously there's going to be a thumbs up, and then it looks like, wow, we were in consensus, only 1 or 2 people voted no. And we are a caucus the same way as you are a caucus. So
Mhm.
when you do the thumbs up 5 to 1, it doesn't work. So if you wanted to say farmers are up and whatever the caucus is, however we define them, are down or up to, that you'd have to do that to be fair. It does, it's not,
Well, I would look at it, but then there's another way to caucus. Let's look at it on the amount of acre feet of water that each particular entity uses. That would be the way I would caucus. In other words, okay, so the farmers are right now are using 85% of the water or 70% of the water. So then they have 70% of the vote. Because they're the ones that are most likely
you can't say
affected.
that to the cities. You
Well-
can't, the city's sorry, we have more than you, we make all the decisions.
No, what
Stacks,
I'm saying.
We make all the decisions,
No,
environment.
what I'm saying is well, yeah, but to caucus and say, okay, he's gonna vote, he has 1 vote and we have 1 vote.
Well,
I
that
can't go
happened
along
with the
with that.
CAF. That was exactly the way.
And Joe, just to make sure, because the instructions are a little bit different. Like everybody's representing their beneficial user, and our GSA reps, they have to be cognizant, like Steve and you, and I guess now we're gonna have to find Brian Watson's replacement, but those 3 folks have to remember you're a GSA. So GSA actually is managing MOMT and all the beneficial users. So again, our goal here is to drive to consensus. While we may feel we may not get there, I have been shocked. I have been proven wrong a lot too. We got there. And understand that if we can't get to consensus, we may not get to a water marketing strategy. And you have to believe in each other that you're trying to do the right thing. You have to believe in each other that this is the right thing. And if the product will show that. So I think we're just gonna have to play with it. We can't avoid, if it ends up that way, we can't get there. We won't get there. And we'll have to deal with that. So, let's start with the discussion start at the top and go to the bottom as far as flexibility is concerned.
I think this is a single framework for 3 Kaweah Subbasin GSAs. I would just add a single framework.
Oh, where?
Right, put the cursor, provide a single.
Where are folks at? And Chuck, you're gonna have to say yes or no versus a thumb. All right, no, actually you can put a thumbs up. If we don't see anything, then we know it's a thumbs down. Are you still with us, Chuck?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I'll take my hand down. It's been up for 2 hours.
Where are you?
Maybe put it as whoever speaking.
Anyway, so flexibility is one of the guiding principles. Provide water users with flexibility to comply with new regulations and respond to changing water availability. Is your system,
Thumbs up or down?
I got a pistol out of Craig. I don't know. Chuck?
Yes,
Okay.
I like it.
So we'll, other than my grammar checker said it should be the flexibility.
Okay.
Adaptability, the water marketing strategy should anticipate adjustments in practices, rules, and procedures as conditions change and as the experience of market participants grows and new information becomes available. Should it be adaptive? Adaptive in there.
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah. And it may do it at a high, and just keep one of the decisions. This is an example. You could choose that the market adapts at a more rapid pace than the 5-year reevaluation that Sigma provides. Good question.
I just think we have to adjust that based on changing conditions. Enable or provide for, or
Whoever that is, we can't hear him.
Oh, the question was, is the word anticipate should be replaced with or removed?
What
Should the water marketing strategy should allow, that's what the question is.
Right.
So I think you could be more affirmative than allow. It could require, for example, it could require adjustments and, or maybe something in between in that spectrum.
Should provide for adjustments,
Or plan for, or.
should include.
That's his.
How about
Okay.
Promote.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that one.
Great.
Thumbs up still? Any heartburn? Okay. Transparency, the process of developing the water marketing strategy and for conducting market activities should be visible and understandable to all stakeholders. Transparency includes the availability of accurate and reliable water use data and timely reporting of water market activities. Thumbs up? Okay, Chuck?
I just had one comment there. When you say
Please.
it's visible and understandable to all stakeholders, it does not make any exception for stakeholders that aren't interested in the process. It says that we have to make it available to them. You know, in other words, you know, sit down and watch this, damn it, it's good for you. It's like eat your vegetables. So I would say it's, you know, you have to put interested stakeholders in there. And that's what we want to do.
Great. I like it.
Yeah.
And
It doesn't say that. It says it should be visible and understandable. So that means if I'm interested, I'm going to say, I want it to be visible so I can find it. I think that it's not saying that every stakeholder has to engage. I don't.
Or
read it
that we
way.
have to provide.
But
The thing is we don't want to be having to be
pushing it.
pushing it, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
That there should be a dashboard and every
Yes.
stakeholder should be able to see it.
Same thing.
Yeah, you are. You're actually saying the same
Yeah.
thing. It's just,
Right.
yeah.
Verbiage.
What Chuck's pointing out is, you made my job better. I don't have to go drag people who are not interested to go sit down
Right.
and explain it to them so that they, you know, I meet a threshold that I can't meet.
Right.
So it should be,
To interested
yeah.
stakeholders. And then I would propose the price discovery that's equitable should be up there under transparency. It's not its own standalone.
Oh,
Copy and paste that.
what do you mean? You want it within it?
I think so. Isn't that part of transparency?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or that could be under equity and inclusion, I guess, too. Yeah.
Can you read out what you're putting up there? 'Cause
So do you want the price discovery and equitability in a transparency or equity and inclusion?
Of our individual users, confidentiality as much as you.
So
I actually, by the way, that might,
The broad brush statement of we're gonna report all activities. So that is.
yeah, no, so by the way, so this, we might put a placeholder here. I think this probably needs to be its own principle. This was one of the really big issues for us because we do telemetric monitoring, right? Real-time monitoring of extraction. And there was tremendous concern about, well, who could see my pumping data, right?
But that's a huge thing in the water market too.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is,
So,
and the other thing is, those you may have, for example, grower A and grower B, neighbors, two neighbors there. And maybe there's some other concessions. You know what? If you, I'll sell you my water at this given amount of money, it's between us and I'll do land work for you in exchange for that. Or something like that, where it's kind of an equivalency, but it's really not out there. In other words, there's a market out there, but yet it doesn't dissuade people from marketing amongst themselves using this price discovery thing. It's kind of like, in other words, on the old Haymarket reports and so on, or whatever. You had some brokers who would share the information, but there was a lot of deals. Most of the deals were going between grower and dairyman or whatever the case is that were never reported, but they referred to the market report as kind of a benchmark to go from.
Yeah, I would propose for this, because this is worth spending some time talking about. I would have duplicate the slide here and put, we need unresolved issues and grower market participant confidentiality is a big issue. I just hit duplicate slide, usually make it erase. And then, or just put grower, grower confidentiality or market participant confidentiality, whatever. It's a big issue. We'll have to spend some time on that. Yeah. Great.
So back to the transparency question is, do we want price discovery that is equitable lofted into transparency? Or leave it its own, or maybe even put it in there, equity and inclusion?
I don't get what you're suggesting. I'm sorry.
So take the price discovery that is equitable on the bottom and then fold it into transparency, leave it its own, or maybe fold it into equity and the concept of the price discovery that is equitable, it's kind of, not creating.
Because I see it as part of timely reporting of water market activity. Price information is a critical component of timely reporting of water market activity, right? People need price information at some level. It can be aggregated in order to know how to make decisions in the marketing strategy, right? So to me, price discovery is critical to that, the second sentence under transparency.
And Craig, to me, or not Craig, excuse me, Neil, it also speaks to me as the equitability, and I'm not sure what terms we are using for people that are selling and people that are buying. I don't know if it's bankers and extractors or what the verbiage is, but it should be equitable between those parties as well.
Like that.
Explain equitable, Chuck.
Yeah.
In other words, because, yeah, explain what is equitable.
Well, what I view it as is that they're receiving the same, economic benefit. In other words, if somebody is paying X dollars per acre foot for an extraction right, that whoever is giving that up is getting that same benefit. And of course, you have a lot of other rules that tie to that, where you have some yield loss and other things. It's not the same. It's just equitable. And you also have the rules about moving from area to area and all those other things. But within that context, you're trying to provide price parity between the sellers and the buyers, because if you don't, over the long run, your market's going to start to shrink, or it's going to turn into a black market.
Right.
So that's where I'm going with that. I don't know what the right verbiage is, but that's my.
But somehow where that somebody's got to be paying for the management, for the dashboard, and who's going to manage all this. So that is not going to be. Where's that money coming from? Well, you're going to take it off of both, or
I'm not saying it's the same. I'm saying that it's equitable.
Okay.
In other words, there's yield loss and there's a lot of other things involved as well. But equitable to me is not 15% of the value of somebody is paying, receiving it to fallow land, nor is it 100%, because you do have costs of administering it. But that needs to be determined what is equitable. And it may not be the same in all zones. But that should be a guiding principle that we're looking for, as we're trying to make it fair to both parties.
No, Chuck, the question is, are you talking more about the price of the transaction?
Sure. Yeah, price discovery was not my term. Somebody else put that in there.
Okay.
I don't know. So what?
So maybe, because it sounds like you're talking about a much bigger issue than I was imagining when you first said it. So do we need to park that?
Let's take it out and park it and deal with it, right?
I agree.
So let me take it out and go back to the original.
That makes sense. It doesn't sound like it's.
We had agreement on this.
Yeah.
So I think That's fine.
And then price formatting, we
And then I'll
park till
put
next
that,
time.
I'll put this statement, but we still need to clarify it in the, in the parking lot. Okay, so do no harm. So this is the water marketing strategy should measure, test, and address the risks of adverse impacts to water users and uses. Thanks, Mark.
Can you repeat?
The water marketing strategy should measure, test, and address risks of adverse impacts to water users and uses. We went away from saying we are going to address DAC and environmental concerns to and this goes more towards that measurable objective and minimum threshold, that as we're making decisions to do things, is it measuring, testing, and addressing any risks to water users and uses?
I would imagine in the context of if there's constraints that have been applied to the particular, to the particular model that's being used by the GSAs and so on, I would think those things are in there already. In other words, you have a limit. You can only move it so far. You can only move so much from a particular given area, for example, or whatever the case may be, or your proximity to a disadvantaged community, or those kinds of things are going to be constraints within the thing there that I don't know if it's already, identified, then it just takes care of itself. Now, we may have to modify it as things change. In other words, as we see that, oh no, we're still getting effects from over pumping this far away from a disadvantaged community or something, then we can, we might change those rules in the application of the transfers of the water.
So what I'm hearing,
No harm has to include, I thought we changed it, which I could live with, the risk of adverse impacts to third parties, to third-party water users and uses. And we dropped off including DACs and GDEs. I thought that's what we agreed to.
Sorry, so third parties, because it's.
What?
The water management strategy should work to limit potential adverse impacts to all water users.
Well, we got all was controversial because that's so poorly defined.
Right? If we're talking about DACs and farm and everybody else, it's all.
Small farmer, big farmer.
Yeah.
Should that just,
So we shouldn't have to address or we're trying to limit impacts and then go back up to adaptability.
Well, that's what I heard Joe saying is your
You're not trying to
decisions.
set something up right away that's gonna make an impact. Trying to limit that.
Yeah, and then go
see
adjust it.
something, you go with that.
You go adjust it.
Well, yeah. So one thing though, too, is make sure you're thinking about it, not just the impact of a transfer on a disadvantaged community or the environment. It might be an adverse impact to your neighbor, right? Their pumping levels decline. That's a cause, not just for problems with the GSP, it's a cause for adjudication, right? And so
No, I agree with that. I mean, it's particularly when you go to the east side over there where there's limited water.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do no harm. It seems
Water users, what, is it?
Yeah, that's fine.
that's fine. Okay, so we're back there. Okay, so
Okay.
should you just tier that directly to the water code section that defines beneficial users and uses of water? Because there is a list that's specific to which
In the
water
GSP,
types are
yeah,
covered under
that's
state law.
interesting. That's a good point. We could just cite the beneficial uses in the water code.
beneficial users and uses.
Yeah, it's like 10.723 or something like that.
So the water marketing strategy should measure, test, and address the risk of adverse impacts to the
Water
beneficial.
How about risks? So if we get rid of risks, is if measure and address adverse impacts to beneficial water use. How's that?
You gotta have a risk because you don't know until you study it, whether or not there's an adverse effect.
Say it one more time. Say it one more time.
Water management strategy should work to limit potential adverse impacts to all water users and uses. However you want to tie that into the beneficial user list. Just working the limit. And then if there's something shows up.
Go back to adaptability. But then do we need to build something into adaptability about addressing adverse impacts?
You're already making adjustments as conditions change and a condition.
To do harm, yeah.
So are you saying get rid of address? I thought we all agreed on address. That
Because you're addressing it by going up to adaptability.
each one of these has to stand on its own, because you don't want somebody to say, oh, well, that's covered somewhere else in section whatever. These are the principles that we stand for.
No, I do think though, I do think that I actually think they can only stand as a group.
Yeah, I was,
Yeah, they can't, definitely. I'm not saying that, but I don't think you say, well, we're not saying it anywhere here because we was really intended to be said up here. I'm saying each one of these, yes, have to all agree, but they have to be standalone in terms of what their meaning is.
But addressing them, they would be more like you're mitigating.
What do you think? I didn't miss that.
Addressing these still sounds too much like we're mitigating or something like that.
Well,
Address is a pretty,
so how about it? So then,
address is a pretty broad
sure.
category of
Well, so how about
how you address that.
adaptability? We said promote adjustments. So there's nothing in here yet that's active. We will respond to adverse impacts. It feels like that should either be in adaptability or in do no harm.
So anticipate and respond to the risks of adverse. Is that what you're suggesting? I can live with that.
Well, I'm saying if we're not comfortable, some people aren't comfortable with it, do no harm, it could also be under adaptability instead.
I think do no harm has to stand on its own. I think it's huge. The whole, that is the basics of half of the Sigma stuff is that.
But then you're getting rid of. Well, but that now the risks won't work.
But in respond
to adverse, now you have to get rid of risks. So anticipate and respond. So what's the language that
Well,
brings these together?
I think we're all in agreement on what we want here, but we can't find agreement.
can't find the wording.
Yeah. Find the word.
But this one's pretty important.
Can we thumbs up the idea?
No, wow.
well, it's about
the
the way you have it though, should respond, should
I think you want to anticipate.
respond.
I think, okay,
I'm okay with it.
great, okay.
That works. So
Okay. Well, I think it's anticipating is different than measuring and responding.
My thinking on this.
Yep.
They should not describe an activity, they should describe an objective.
That's why, yeah, I didn't like I actually don't like respond because you're saying this principle is saying we got to go do something.
Right.
This principle is saying we can either take it up or we can't take it up. So,
well, no, because the objective would be how you can act toward that particular.
What's the limit, right?
Well, but again, respond is so open-ended. I think this is what Sophie's saying.
Yeah.
That's not prescriptive.
Well, aren't you saying you're anticipating potential activities that could affect or become an undesirable result? And then
Yes.
implementing an action that avoids that impact to those water users and users?
So you're anticipating, you're also then responding when you discover them.
They anticipate and avoid.
Yeah.
I could live with it.
Proactive measures to change an outcome. Avoidance, you're not going to let it happen.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Aren't we talking about, we're talking about do no harm through the process of establishing this market, correct?
Well, and through facilitating transfers of pumping, actually.
Well, but that's what the water market is doing, right? Is
Yep.
facilitating transfers of pumping in great part. And so this do no harm is specific to that function.
Correct. Correct.
I think if you look at in that context, this is probably fine, and probably the other versions were fine too, if it's looked strictly. And then,
Don't tell us that, Chuck. That's not fair.
I don't, you know, I think I agree with Dopey. It's a critical piece of what we're doing, because it is the vast majority of SGMA. It's not telling us what to do, it's telling us what not to hurt. So, you know, I think it needs to be a standalone. It probably needs to be up at the top. And I think, you know, as I work on this committee and would read that, you know, I would say, hey, whatever we're doing here, you know, we have to continually go through iterations of process to, when we find this is harming somebody that's involved in, you know, in the water market or impacted by the water market, we have to try and address those issues. So I think it makes
measure and respond, or anticipate and avoid, or something else.
I would propose anticipate and avoid.
The only other thing, I wonder what the founding fathers did when they got into this. I don't know. I'm an engineer also, and I'm not an English major, so I'm fine with whatever you do.
And then, so by the way, the other one that we had planned to do virtual.
Sorry, folks. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. I don't think that.
Great. Okay, cool. Hey, we see you. Oh, it stopped sharing. It stopped the screen share.
Oh,
Well, when that thing dropped, I think I dropped lots
my internet. That's what happened.
So, and so
Yeah, hold on a second. I might.
at some point we will address the order of these. The ordering matters, but not today.
Where we editing this to?
He's trying to.
I'm
I
trying to
think
get back up and running. Hold on.
For a general agreement, it seems like I anticipate and avoid the risk of adverse impacts. Can't we do a thumbs up for that right now?
Yeah.
all right. And is it do you want and we can try and align the language more with SGMA in the future, in a future iteration.
Good.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll put add.
In parentheses, yeah.
Yeah, add.
Lingo. Yeah, good. All right. So we didn't vote. Yeah.
We didn't vote, but we, again.
I think we're good there now, right?
David's asking. He wants to get more chocolate and go. Are you good?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Chuck, you're good?
Sorry, you didn't hear my head rattle.
Joe,
Are you good?
which finger did you vote with there?
I love it.
I didn't know I had that choice.
You're good with that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Equity and inclusion. The water marketing strategy should be developed with an open process that includes the full range of potential market participants and other stakeholders who could be impacted. Implementation of the water marketing strategy should be relatively simple and understandable to all stakeholders.
To interested stakeholders.
To
interested stakeholders.
Yeah, that's right. We changed. In addition, the water marketing strategy should be equitable and accessible to all.
And equitable.
All equitable.
In the last sentence, equitable seems, I don't know what that's not well defined.
It should just be accessible, should be accessible to all interested parties.
Well,
that makes sense under this header, because it's about inclusion.
I do have a comment on this one. For when we say accessible to all, are we also including, obviously not all stakeholders are going to be interested, but what about those whose primary language isn't going to be the language that's written, and is that included already in the language, or is that implied? Because if not, I would like to see that at least written. Because I definitely know residents who don't speak English but are very much so interested, and then technical language translating is very difficult thing to do.
So so again, when you apply this filter as the prior discussions, as you start developing, let's just say you're going to develop the actual water marketing strategy guideline instruction manual. The decision is that has to be provided in languages that are approachable, and or a mechanism that makes it available in the languages. Like for instance, in the way we look at things, right? Spanish is the default. We got to do it in that. But what about Hmong and Cantonese and all those other things? Well, there should be a mechanism where the request could generate that document, but you don't have to generate it right off the bat, right?
Get rid of all, just interested party.
Okay.
Two
so-
interested parties.
Two. You need the two.
So the water marketing strategy should be developed with an open process that includes the full range of potential market participants and other stakeholders who could be impacted. Implementation of the water marketing strategy should be relatively simple and understandable to interested stakeholders. In addition, the water marketing strategy should be accessible to interested parties.
Is the last sentence repetitive?
Yeah, it is. I would,
You need it.
I would suggest in the first sentence, just changing out other stakeholders who could be impacted, just say other interested parties, period.
Yeah.
So I think you need to probably define who your stakeholder is going to be, whether or not it's geographically limited or it's external. I think an interested stakeholder could be a regulator.
Is it interested stakeholders or interested parties?
I'd say interested party. There is some sensitivity around just the term stakeholder in the broader kind of
Because who is this? Yeah.
social construct. And then the last sentence can be deleted. And then I would also change interested stakeholders, just interested parties.
Okay, third reading. The water marketing strategy should be developed with an open process that includes the full range of potential market participants and other interested parties. Implementation of the water marketing strategy should be relatively simple and understandable to interested parties. Thumbs up? All right. So the last one doesn't have any verbiage around it, but is it the guideline that we're looking for? We're not developing 3 frameworks, we're developing 1 framework. The other issues of others tweaking it or whatever, I can't tell mid-kaweah, you need to do this, and they'll make that decision, but we're developing 1 framework.
And it's just a framework.
Correct.
They will implement it or
Correct.
not, right?
Or not,
And modify it.
and modify it, or, yep. Thumbs up?
Okay, modify it is what's kind of hanging in my mind.
Yeah.
So that, and it goes back to the other conversation about federal versus state laws. So this says provide a single framework, which the way it's written right now, the title of it sounds like that is it. It's a singular framework that all will adopt as written.
Well, this water marketing strategy is to provide that.
And I don't think you can, obviously, the committee can't bind the GSAs, right? So
Right.
I don't think you can make it more specific.
I think when you put the text in it,
Yeah.
you might need to say something along with there will be a common framework that's applicable to all.
Okay.
So we
develop a common framework applicable to all 3 kaweah subbasin GSAs.
What about available instead of applicable? In other words, all 3 GSAs have that at their disposal.
I like that. I think what we were trying to imply though is that we're actually trying to integrate the concerns of all 3 GSAs in the interests of all 3 GSAs.
Is this supposed to be instead of promote regional management objectives? I'm lost. Or is this an addition to the equity and inclusion?
Oh, I'm sorry, it should be.
It's a new bullet
it's-
point.
It lost its, I can't create that bullet.
That's all right. I just was like
Do the
confused.
arrow, do the arrow. I think you can do the arrow.
Whatever.
The little down arrow next to the bullet. No, go up top, right there. Click on that.
Oh,
Select the, there you go.
Yeah.
Boom.
the water marketing strategy.
A common framework.
Will develop a common.
So is this another principle?
Yeah, we're saying.
You got to put it so that it's linguistically in the same format because the other ones are.
Yeah, so the.
Yeah, so we need a title for it. You're
Yeah,
right. We
so-
need
yeah,
a
yeah,
title.
yeah. So, actually, the title is the flexibility, adaptability, transparent, do no harm, equity framework.
You said before economic equitable system.
Oh, no, we took that, that's a
Okay,
a lot item.
that's right. I'm sorry.
How about structure?
Structure and consistency, or consistent structure. I don't know.
Your structure.
Structural consistency.
Engineers.
No.
Put it down as ponding basin.
Water marketing strategy will develop a common framework available to the Kawea Subbasin GSAs.
Good.
I think you turned it into a camel. It was a lot more understandable before. We're developing.
Yeah.
One.
So put the title in parentheses. We need a better title.
No, I was talking, I understand that, but it was but we're developing a single framework, right? And
yes,
that's what we're doing. What they do with it is, is up to the GSAs.
Yeah, to be honest, it doesn't even need to be a guide. I think it's an understanding.
Okay.
It's a common.
Fair enough. Is that okay?
It's a common, we're not going to develop three different.
Well, but the question came up in this room though.
Yeah.
So that's why it ended up there, because
I understand that. And it wasn't, the single framework wasn't even there and somebody put it in. I went, that makes a lot of sense.
At the bottom, it was framework for the Kawea Subbasin GSA. That was.
Yeah, and it was Chuck that brought it up because, and it was built upon, I think what Joe was saying is that, we're not sitting here developing three different rules so that we can implement in three different GSAs. We're developing, I think we understood that on day one. We also understood that the GSAs get the choice to implement or not implement and tweak where they need to tweak.
And we need a platform that can communicate across GSAs.
That's
a potential guiding principle though. Anyway, so does it need to be here or not? That's the question. No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Does anyone think yes, it needs to be here? That's easy.
This becomes a publicly facing rule that you need to explain to all participants.
That's why.
So it's probably going to be useful that you more or less say the rules, practice, procedures of the water marketing strategy applied throughout the basin. And you're just clear on that.
How about you leave it in there, but it's one of those ones that.
I mean, I don't think it hurts us.
Okay.
It's not negative at all.
Yeah, I mean, it may be a little bit redundant perhaps, but at least it's covered.
And I think the name is confusing. People are like, what? Yeah. So put the name in parentheses.
We'll come up with that parking lot.
I don't know what structure. Yeah, I don't know what to name it though.
I would just call it. It's the work. It's the deliverable.
Shared.
What's the deliverable? It's a framework.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway.
All right. So does anyone disapprove of leaving it in for now?
We'll just leave it in and wordsmith it.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have two parking lot items.
Great. All right.
Joe, we just voted on all, and I didn't see a thumbs down. My faith is in you people more than you even. There will be wine at the next one. I will have wine at the next one. It's interesting how people, these are tough issues. We'll see how now, if you think this was tough, we're going to start going into the.
No, I don't know. It depends. This was the hard part for us. And this took us more than 3 months. We would spend multiple meetings fighting about one principle, right? And then everything just went like. Anyway, so what we will do with this, so we're going to start laying this over the actual menu of strategies, and again, presenting you with decision points under each of these principles. right, regarding specific rules, structures, operating mechanisms employed in other markets. And so that will be, so that's our plan for the next committee meeting. Again, one of the things we want to, and so that means that, again, the pace now picks up dramatically. But the other one too is that, this is a committee-led process. So at any point, if you have suggestions about how you would like us to use this information, suggestions about how you'd like us to use the next meeting, please be open and you can send us emails, communicate through Aaron. But that's our plan for the next step. Again, you will receive from us a lengthy report on existing water market strategies. Will also be, and we'll give you 2 weeks before the next meeting so that you can look that over. And we will also be discussing that at the next meeting.
We did it. And let's hold the next meeting. I'll get back with you guys. We'll figure out how we're going to do it. But is your comfort level that, I mean, minus any other issues, we meet in person again? If that's the case, maybe I propose we do a meal before or something and enjoy some nice conversation and then get to work, or have our conversation and then have lunch or dinner or something like that. So I'll work on that. We'll see where we're going to be at. I think as we get into the hotter months, we might have to go over to the city of Visalia, and I'll talk to Steve about that, about using their facility here in the next meeting. So thank you.
Aaron,
Yeah.
for the foreseeable future, I have to go to San Francisco on Wednesdays. So if there's any chance you could have meetings other than Wednesdays, or if you do them in the evening, I could probably make it back in time.
Okay, yeah, no, it actually works out. Matthew just indicated we've got some scheduling conflicts, so we'll have to move it off. We'll do the good old fashioned. Jeremy will have to call everybody, we'll find a date, time, and
Beautiful.
everybody.
Lucky guy.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.